Cinphomaniac is full of spoilers. If the movie's there in the title, we're probably gonna say everything that happens in it. So don't fucking listen if you don't want to know.
Believe it or not, Eraserhead is my most spiritual film.
Mm-hmm. Why elaborate on that?
No, I won't.
They say, how come if you're so happy, you make films that are so dark and troubling? The bottom line is the artist doesn't have to suffer to show suffering. Or, as you say, you don't have to die to shoot a death scene.
I'm not all that strange, really. And also, everybody beneath a lot of times a calm exterior is, the subconscious, right? And that's where everyone has their little, well, not little, but, the denizens of the deep and all that. And this film, a lot of people say, is a real sort of subconscious experience. It unearths things that are inside of people. So it's sort of like a dream, the dream theme again too.
A candy-colored clown tiptoes to my room every night. Just as
Future past, the magician longs to see.
Oh baby, I know every little star, just how sweet I think you are. Why haven't I known you?
This is the girl.
Chance, huh? Between two worlds.
Excellent choice.
Walk with me.
We live inside
We live inside a dream.
Heineken! Fuck that shit! Pabst Blue Ribbon! What's going on with you?
Oh, I don't know. Just getting ready to talk about probably like one of my all-time favorite movies, and
the most Lynchian of Lynch movies. That's
pretty much.
Yes.
I mean, well, that's an
Is
interesting
this not
question.
the quintessential to you? I think it is. I thought it was kind of.
I think it. So
I mean,
yeah, it's
Twin Peaks is a show.
Twin Peaks is a show,
So
though.
like
David
film
Lynch.
wise,
Well, that's the thing. David Lynch goes, it's not though. It's a movie. It's a 21 movie. That's his take.
for Twin Peaks, yeah.
Yeah, but like obviously you can make or whatever of that. I think for me, yeah, that's an interesting question. I wrestle with. I try to just kind of like ignore it and whatever. But even if I include Twin Peaks, like Mulholland Drive is a really special thing. I think everything we're going to talk about today is obviously going to highlight that. But this thing is a beast and a half. It's like, I think I've said similar before, and I obviously have, but I'm definitely in a position right now where I'm like, this is a movie that is interesting to talk about because it is absolutely one of the most discussed and picked apart. And
well, there's so many rabbit holes to follow. There's so many ways to interpret so many aspects of this. Like it's,
sure,
you can take any one given scene and look at it 10 ways, depending on
well, like actually let's
what your focus is.
Yeah, let's actually start with that because, well, first of all, welcome to Lynchtober. Yes, I know it's November, but
it rounds up.
We don't care about things like who gives a shit how long a month is anyway. Like that's not our thing.
We don't let the moon dictate.
No, we don't. We definitely don't. And we have our own methodology. And so, yeah, we have this, and then there's one more week of Lynchtober after this, where we will cover the most recent thing David Lynch has put out, which is, of course, the return of Twin Peaks 2017, season 3, limited event series, however you want to call it. It's got like 7 different alternate official names. But yeah, we're going to talk about that last, and there's no better sort of point to kind of fixate on if you want to bridge the gap between the last chronological Lynchtober, because obviously last week we did Doom, but that was kind of going out of order to sync up with the release of Denise Dune, right? But like when we last spoke about Twin Peaks, you know, this is kind of like the next major point. We're going to talk briefly about the points in between just to acknowledge their existence and get the important points out there. But bringing it back to Mulholland Drive, like, yeah, this is one of the most picked apart movies. And like Dana was saying, there's many, many ways to interpret it, and many have. And I think what's important is that regardless of those many interpretations, the general takeaway is that people not only love this movie, but it is widely revered. And that's something that means a lot to me because, of course, I love it, but it's nice when you love something gets that kind of recognition across the board. However, it does come with the consequence, like I said, of a lot of perhaps faux senses of authority with regard to what's going on in the film. And that's where I have to start too, to say, like, kind of continuing on with the threads we've been following throughout Lynchtober. My goal is to try to give what I consider to be a pretty thorough and definitive way of understanding these movies. That's obviously my own. It's obviously influenced and heavily impacted by other people I've listened to and respect and think have made compelling arguments. So, you know, I don't take sole credit for everything I say. Most of it I can't really take credit for. In fact, I can only tell you that, like, I'm giving you this information because I'm going to make my own impassioned argument for why I also agree with it, right? And I think it's important too, just to carry the thread forward, because if I was saying things about Blue Velvet and Twin Peaks and Eraserhead, and then all of a sudden on Mulholland Drive, I was kind of like throwing out a totally different methodology, that would be pretty inconsistent. Kind of the whole point here is to say that, like, once you start to unravel Lynch, it starts to fit together across the board, right? Mm-hmm. So I think that's kind of the beauty of it. But okay, yeah, Dana, before we go any further, just kind of I'd be curious if you could tell me a little bit about your history with Mulholland Drive. I can give a little bit of my own. I think I talked about it on an earlier Lynchtober, but yeah, just kind of like when you first saw this movie. I think as a actress, I'm very curious about your perspective on it.
Yes. I think I actually did see this movie after having lived in LA for a few years. And so I had already been feeling some of the feelings that Diane feels just through the audition process. And when you first get to LA, that first feeling of being a really, really small fish, being just like the tiniest and one of millions, and getting that kind of overwhelming feeling of, you know, grasping for opportunities kind of, and trying to find a way to make your way when you're in a sea of, like, everybody's got a headshot resume ready to go. Everybody's like on it. Everybody's ready to give you their reel and tell you their followers. You know what I mean? So I definitely identified with her character in that sense. And also in the sense when Camila becomes very successful, it's hard to grapple with those jealousy demons. I'm not going to lie, and just be like, you know what? What's for me is for me, and what's for you is for you. And just try to genuinely be happy for your friends when they do well. But you see her grappling with that a lot. And I think that's like the demon of a lot of actors, is the comparison, is the competition. And I think the biggest part of trying to keep a sane head for me is trying to focus on the art and me just doing a job that I feel I'm proud of. And then if I'm the right puzzle piece for them, great. If I'm not, I gave you my best, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, you know, it's interesting what you said. I mean, it definitely, I think, reflects well on you, Dana, though, you know, as you said, like jealousy and those things. And those are all very understandable and relatable things. And they do course to this movie. But I think, as we're going to talk about,
this is a lot more complex. You know, she has a history with Camila as well. She's not just a friend who's auditioning for stuff. There's just a little more than that.
Well, it kind of, yes, but it definitely kind of, like, when you're first, because I also want to, like, make sure I give some credence to a perspective that someone might have who is not watching this film for the 50th time and studying like the third thing in the background, but like is just experiencing for the first time. And like therefore, like when you first meet Camila, or as she becomes known to Betty as Rita, and like that relationship at first, especially when you don't know where any of it's going, I think it does feel very like wholesome and like kind of at face value. I know when I first watched it, which is actually maybe a good way to talk about that a little bit, but I know when I first watched it, like, cause now when I watch Betty and Rita, like, we'll talk a little bit more about it, but everything feels like explosively tense with sexual tension. And like, I did not see it that way the first time at all.
You didn't?
Like, no, not until obviously it becomes explicit. I did not see it that way. Now I don't remember. I mean, again, like I'm trying to remember what was going through my brain 12 years ago. Like, you know what I mean? Like that's not like exactly the easiest thing to do.
I don't know if it's because I'm a woman or like whatever. I just like I sensed the tension between them right away. I was like, oh, what's going on here?
I think it could also be that you were probably, not to call you old, Dana, but a little bit older than me when you first saw this.
For sure.
I mean, like I think me now, if I saw the movie for the first time now, I think I probably would pick up on that a lot more.
Yeah.
But at like 18 years old, just not really.
Yeah, I see that.
Yeah. But no, like for real, like I saw this movie when I was first got into college. I was at the time this is back in the Netflix DVD days, but I was renting a lot of Netflix DVDs. One, because I knew there was certain stuff I had to watch for class, but just like two, like because I had to do that anyway. I was getting in this mind where like I wanted to be inspired. I was starting to make my own films. Like I wanted to just like kind of immerse myself. And I'd already been doing that throughout high school and even middle school. Now was the time where I did have my own Netflix account, even though it was DVD by mail. Well, actually the streaming account came out right then too, but there was like barely anything on it. I think the first thing I ever really watched on it was extensively was actually Lost, funny enough. But yeah, like I just was like kind of going through all of it and just catching up with a lot of movies. And Mulholland Drive was already being acknowledged pretty widely as like this must-see masterpiece movie. And I think it had already been brought up to me in some context in class. And around the same time, like, because early in my classes, we just talked a lot about Hitchcock. And it's like, I don't know, it's kind of strange to start with that on the one hand, but it's great if you want to plot a trajectory of a certain type of film mind, which ended up being mine. In some ways, despite all my troubles, I ended up being the perfect pupil, I think people will have to say, because
you do your homework. No one
I
can
do my homework, and like my specific taste is so coarse by that, because it's like you go from Hitchcock to Lynch to like kind of the wider spectrum of European auteurs, your Bergmans, your Polanski's with the asterisk on that guy's name, of course, and so forth, and then you get to like my sensibility of just a heavy sense of
you
noir
like when people
foreboding.
make you think. Also,
yeah, of course.
You don't like when people hand things to you, which I think that makes us a little bit outside of current trend of filmmaking, like the 20 to 2010s to 2020s. Like a lot of it feels like it's just handed to you, and I'm not
totally, but like
wondering I'm not like questioning things, and I'm not trying to figure out puzzles. Like it's less of an interactive experience lately, and taking it back to movies like this.
I'll give you an example, and I was thinking about where and how I was going to mention this in here, because I do think, weirdly enough, there is some similarities. But so if you don't know, listeners, it should have been popping up on your feed before this will come out, but we started a new project, which I'm calling Cinphomaniac Rapid Fire. And this is something you're going to see a lot of over the next 2 months. We'll see what happens after these next 2 months, because there'll be less new releases. And the idea with Rapid Fire is that you get very quick, believe it or not, 10 minutes or less episodes Right as soon as I can get them out to you, as soon as a new movie comes out, as soon as I am able to see it, which hopefully in some cases will be right away or like even a little before in some cases, because sometimes I get invited to early screenings. You know, once I'm able to do that, I'm able to put this out and give you kind of like a quick, if not entirely, the mostly spoiler-free kind of just hot take on the film. And so we released the very first one, which just features me,
Yes.
but it's talking about Last Night in Soho, the new Edgar Wright film. Now, I mentioned there that there's like, in a way that I wasn't even fully expecting, though, of course, my interest and anticipation for this movie probably was tinged with it right from the get-go, because I could tell from the marketing and other things Edgar Wright had said, like, oh, there's definitely a bit of a Mulholland Drive thing. You have two women. One's a brunette, if you will. One's a blonde. Then the other one becomes a blonde, which is, again, goes back to Hitchcock, as we're going to talk about. And so there's this whole kind of like, psycho thing. It's like, I don't mean psycho like the movie Psycho, psychological, and then like kind of almost like Bergman's Persona, which is another huge, important influence on me. Definitely an influence on Lynch and a film movie like Mulholland Drive. And so they have aspects of that, but that's the big difference though, Dana, what you said. Everything in Last Night in Soho is explained to you. Like literally everything.
Really? It is?
Of course.
Oh, I'm so sad you're telling me that.
Only, but like, I mean, don't be sad. I think it's a good movie. I wasn't like, oh my God, why they explain everything. In fact, as I talked about on the rapid fire, my biggest hesitancy of the movie didn't really have to do with what I assumed was in the movie. It had to do with the fact that the trailer gave everything away.
Yeah, the trailer gives away a lot.
I was like, what? I remember watching the trailer. I'm like, you just like killed all my anticipation for this movie. You know what? I can imagine. You think I was mad? David Lynch, the rant, the absolutely vicious rant he would go on if he saw that trailer. He'd be like, there's no fucking mystery. You're not explaining everything. It's like, if you give it away, there's no room to dream. There's no thinking. Like it just.
He's not wrong.
No, he's not wrong. And there was some additional twists and layers. And in fact, that was the thing. I felt like ultimately, and this was my hope and fear after seeing that trailer, that like the trailer is ultimately misleading. It is, but like it still gives away too much, even in its misleadingness. And then the things that it doesn't give away are kind of like, again, a little bit who cares / we're also just going to explain it all to you. We're not going to leave any mystery, nothing open to interpretation.
Nothing
like you go
to
back
wonder
to
about.
Like Persona, Bergman's Persona, or Polanski's Repulsion, or any of these other, they don't explain shit to you. I just don't understand why we have to explain everything. It's really lame.
I don't think we have to. I think filmmakers are just thinking that we're dumb. And
I don't think Edgar Wright thinks his audience is dumb. Let me just be very clear about that.
The trends are showing, and the big time producers are thinking, well, let's appeal to the broadest audience. Let's appeal to people who don't need to think about questions and leave the theater with wonder and with unanswered things, grappling their mind. Oh, I got to figure this out.
Well,
they assume
here's
that
my
most
thing.
people don't want that, and
Edgar
most
Wright
people want it handed to them.
I know that there was involvement of studios and producers and his co-screenwriter, but like just focusing on Edgar Wright for a second, Edgar Wright is not a person who I think in any way plays down to an audience. I think he loves his films and loves his audience and wants to impress them and wants to make great things. And so I think he absolutely had every intention of doing that.
Sure, but he's also making movies in 2021.
But more specifically is what I would say. I think if you go and look at his films, that's not what he does. He doesn't make stories that don't kind of give you the answers. Like all his best stuff, all the Cornetto films, they explain what's going on at some point in the movie. Like they'll play it up for suspense, but they'll eventually explain. Like Hot Fuzz explains why everything's happening. Like the world ends explains what's happening. Shaun of the Dead explains what's happening. Scott Pilgrim in some ways explains what's happening. But I think the point is, to me, and where he erred in that, is that he might, as a filmmaker, never have had a problem, quote, explaining what's happening. But if you're going to make a film that's kind of borrowing from the genres of film that his film is borrowing from, and kind of taking the tones and looks and feels of the films that he's taking the tones and looks and feels from, I think it would have been better to keep the film a lot more mysterious and a lot more open for interpretation than he did. And that's a shame that it's not that movie. So, yeah, and look.
Well,
you're
yeah,
obviously
visually,
right, too,
it looks like a film noir, like a neon film noir.
Oh, neon.
So
noir.
I
Yeah,
was
that's
expecting,
our term, yeah.
I was expecting you to tell me that I was gonna solve mystery.
No, but where there is mystery, Dana, is David Lynch. So let's bring it back
Always.
to that.
There's always mystery. There's always light and dark, good and bad.
There's always what is that phrase of his?
Dreams and awake.
There's always that. There's always music in the air. Okay. Well, speaking of there's always music in the air, right? So the first project after Twin Peaks, Dana, I bet you don't know about this. And to be fair, I barely know about it still. And I've been a Lynch fan who's known of this for years, but I've never watched it. It's hard to find, obviously, but if I made an effort, I'm sure I could see it. David Lynch actually had another TV show called On the Air that he also co-created with Mark Frost that was put into development while Twin Peaks was still going, but basically after Twin Peaks was canceled and why Lynch was making Fire Walk with Me, they were shooting episodes for this show elsewhere. Like he filmed the pilot for it. And it's hard to explain the show. I recommend if people are interested, they Google it. Honestly, I don't want to take too much time here, including you, Dana, but like, as the title implies, it basically is like this sort of like kind of weird, like comedy like about like I think radio, like I don't know, I actually really know almost nothing about it, but it exists. It's called On the Air. It involves him and Mark Frost, and as you might imagine, it did not last very long. I think it probably aired its first few episodes, and I think that was it. But you'll see it comes up later in a second with the key personnel we're going to mention. Then David Lynch, after that, and the disaster, I say disaster commercially, of Fire Walk with Me, finally was able to make a new piece of cinema with 1997's Lost Highway. And Lost Highway is a film we will definitely talk about on Lynchtober year 2. I'm looking forward to that conversation. Yeah. Lost Highway is a very complicated movie. And I don't just mean like the complicated gimmicks of its like sort of thing, which again, if you've seen Mulholland Drive, as we're about to talk about it, and you see other Lynch things, won't really surprise you at this point. It's kind of like the first attempt, if you will, at this sort of storytelling structure. Like in every case, the sort of the implementation / implication is a little bit different each time, right? So after Lost Highway, which is arguably Lynch's like darkest and most down and dirty movie, he has a major sort of tonal pivot with his next film, which is The Straight Story, a movie that was released through Disney, that was rated G.
What?
And yeah, do you not know about The Straight Story?
No, I don't.
Well, we're going to talk about it on Lynchtober year 2. But The Straight Story, it's a story about a guy named Richard Straight. I guess it's a somewhat true story. This is important because where The Straight Story came from is I mentioned her when we talked about Twin Peaks, but when David Lynch was making Fire Walk with Me, he worked for the first time with an editor named Mary Sweeney, and they ended up becoming, I think they were married, and they have kids. And around this time, she was kind of becoming more of like his full-time partner in making movies, basically. And so she came up with this story, I think, based off her real life experiences with some person she knew or some relative of hers. And it's literally about an old man who in the movie is played by Richard Farnsworth, drives a tractor across country.
That's cute.
Yeah, it's very cute. And Big Ed's in it.
Oh yeah.
yeah.
Man, Big Ed's in everything, dude.
Yeah, no, I mean he's one of David Lynch's. Why am I blanking on the actor's name? He's a great guy.
They've
and actually, we'll talk about it when we talk about The Return and reassembling the cast for that. But there's a very weird thing where Everett McGill. Yeah, Everett McGill. Everett McGill was kind of like, after filming The Straight Story, kind of like retired from Hollywood and kind of just disappeared. So David Lynch was like, does anyone know where he is? For a minute. like I don't know how to get a hold of him anymore.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, which was very concerning. But of course, then he turned up and he was like looking good and like seemed fine and went to Comic-Con. Like, so he's totally chill, but like,
yeah, but it was like for a second you might have been a missing person. Like,
yeah, well,
let people know you're leaving town so no one freaks out.
I think even for David Lynch, I think it's a little bit indicative of, as something relates to Mulholland Drive, the way Hollywood works, where it's like, if I can't call your agent and get on the phone with you immediately, you must be dead. like, you know, it's a little bit much. But anyway, we'll talk about the straight story next year. I'll just say that, like I said, it was kind of like came out of this collaboration with Sweeney, and which brings me to the next point, which is when it comes to making Mulholland Drive, because the straight story comes out in 1999. So in other words, around the same time that Mulholland Drive was first being developed and then eventually shot. And we're going to get more into the specifics of this later, because I think it's best to kind of almost ignore it for a while. But Mulholland Drive began its journey as a TV series. And even what was a lot of the footage you see in the film that was shot was originally shot to be the TV pilot of the show Mulholland Drive. And I mentioned this kind of briefly a couple weeks ago on Lynchtober, but now we get into it. So but that being said, David Lynch, I think even way more than when he shot the pilot for Twin Peaks, I think this is why it ultimately worked as a film, made it like he would make any of his films. And I think to that point, he assembled a crew that is kind of like maybe the Lynch dream team, not to like, you know, diminish anyone who is excluded off this team that I love, like, you know, your Dwight Dunhams or whoever. This was kind of the team. So you have Sweeney serving as a producer and the editor of the film. This is also on Mulholland Drive, the first collaboration between Lynch and Peter Deming. Peter Deming is the cinematographer. He actually first kind of got into Lynch sphere because he was hired as a DP to shoot episodes for On the Air, not the pilot that Lynch directed. So he didn't actually work with Lynch yet at this point, but he was hired to DP some additional episodes that are going to be directed by other TV directors, right? But it got his name kind of in Lynch's, book, if you will. And then when it came time to find someone to shoot Mulholland Drive, it was like, oh, okay, I like what he's doing on the Air. Let's hire him. So then,
great.
You have...
He's on the radar.
Yeah, this is someone we've talked about before, most extensively when we talked about Eraserhead. But I have some new information that in some ways fills in some gaps and a little bit contradicts what I said in that Eraserhead episode. So keep that in mind. But this was the first time he officially worked with Jack Fisk as the production designer. And we talked about him on Eraserhead, but because Fisk played in Eraserhead, the guy with all the boils, the man that lived in the moon or whatever the hell his title is. He's Lynch's longtime friend, and I had kind of established it like they had met at AFI. I mean, he worked with Terrence Malick, starting with Badlands, and also, you know, he ended up becoming the husband of Sissy Spacek, who was the star of Badlands. And he also went on to work with PTA on two of the greatest movies of all time, There Will Be Blood and The Master. So this guy has only worked on like the best shit, basically.
Yeah. A-Team.
And he made David Lynch's, best movie, many would say. I would, I guess, say, though, again, I'm not, it's hard to commit to that. In any case, the actual origin of him and David Lynch goes even further back than I alluded to when we talked about it on Eraserhead. He actually met David Lynch when they were kids. They went to school
That's
together.
so random.
Yeah. He knew David Lynch as going back to all the way to 9th grade. And you remember he was like,
is it weird that I'm really curious what David Lynch's hair looked like in 9th grade?
Oh,
if it was
not
like
at all weird that you're curious about that. I probably have a picture of it because I think there's some pictures of him around that age in Room to Dream. Like, because Room to Dream, the hardcover book I have, has like it's one of those books that has like middle pages that'll just show a bunch of old photos.
Oh, really? And
yeah. I bet if I grabbed it, I could find one of him at that exact age. But
that's funny.
In any case, yeah, hair is a good question. But the way Fisk talks about him, he's like, yeah, David, you just already knew he was like that. He was like already this guy was like almost like a legend. Like, it was like, what? This guy is like so just like not like anyone else you've ever met in like a way that you're like very much like you look up to. Because I was like a kid into art, and I was like, oh, I hope I'm like that guy.
Aw,
So you get the impression he
that's
almost like
sweet.
followed him around basically after that. And actually one of the funniest things that
Well, I mean, it worked out for him, right?
yeah. Or sorry, I got to correct myself again. I mean, this was just a misspoke. It's in my notes, but no, Fisk worked on The Straight Story. That was the first film that he did with Lynch as the official production designer, because he was involved in some of the set construction on Eraserhead, but you know, there wasn't the official production designer or anything. And David honestly did a lot of the set building himself just at night, just like whatever, you know him.
Wow. Yep.
But yeah,
There you go.
yeah. And so then he got brought on to Mulholland Drive. And one thing he said that's very funny in this interview that he did with Criterion, he goes, it's very funny. It's almost as if he doesn't fully get the implication of Twin Peaks, though you know he's seen it because he talks about it. He's like, David loves red drapes. If you're ever like, I don't know what to do with this set, just bring in some red drapes and be like, wow, I love it. And just put that up everywhere.
Oh my God, it's amazing.
Yeah. And then of course you have Angelo Badalamenti back doing the score again. Kind of same deal as always there, though of course this is another example, much more prominently than when he was in Blue Velvet briefly as the guy actually playing the piano. Badalamenti is in Mulholland Drive as one of the Consigliago brothers, the one who's like spitting out the espresso, and so he actually gets to play the kind of like Scorsese gangster type character that I say he kind of just like reminds you of in real life. Like he feels like he's straight out of like he looks way too much like Paul Sorvino and Goodfellas. But yeah, so there you go. You got to actually kind of be a gangster in a movie. And then lastly, the important part of the dream team is casting director Joanna Ray, who we've talked about before. And that brings me to, honestly, because the whole idea of casting and casting directors, and then of course the cast itself, is not just a thing to celebrate about Mulholland Drive for what it is, which we will, but also very much a part of the fabric of what Mulholland Drive is about, obviously. At the top of the cast, we have Naomi Watts, and we got to talk about her specifically for a minute, because understanding her and her relationship to this movie in her career is weirdly very, not even weirdly, I mean, it's like obvious, but very apt to understanding the film itself and what the film is getting at in many ways. So
sure, this seems like her story.
It is. So for example, Naomi Watts will tell you she struggled for 10 years in LA before finally getting this magical call to meet with David Lynch.
Wow.
Just rejection for 10 years. Basically every audition, never got in anything.
Anything? She must.
Well,
have
I mean, like
credit.
little things here and there, but like, you know what I mean? Like, none of the big parts she ever wanted was she ever cast in. And you know, like it's one of those things where I shouldn't talk about it in any of the interviews on Mulholland Drive that I've seen, but I know in real life she has a friendship with Nicole Kidman. And I don't know if that started all the way back then, but in any case, it must have been weird to be like, wow, look at this person versus me. And yeah, it's interesting because I've already explained the Lynch method, where it's important to keep that in mind when I say like she got the call from David Lynch. Like she got the call out of nowhere, because David Lynch's way of casting is Joanna Ray sends him headshots and he just points, this is the girl. And it's not literally that's it. Like basically what happens next is
I hate to say it, but that's kind of what it is now. When you send in a self-tape that's 2 or 3 minutes, I mean, earmuffs to any green actors who don't want to get their feelings hurt, but they only look at the first 5 seconds. Like they rarely look past the first 5 seconds of your self-tape. It's a David Lynch style. That's how it is now. It's yes or no, yes and no, yes and no. I only know this because I know casting directors and they've all said, yeah, your self-tape, they look at the first few seconds and are like, next. Next.
Okay, hold on. So obviously you're right about that. And I would even say it's obviously true too, that people will just, even when they're casting speaking parts, they'll sometimes just be like, oh, I like this girl in the headshot. That's almost all I need to know. obviously think that happens, but I want to distinguish that from what Lynch is trying to do, at least giving Lynch the full benefit of the doubt. And I think we're going to talk about the casting and Naomi Watts. We certainly need to do that because the Lynch
Had
method,
he not heard her, he hadn't heard her voice.
No, like
Oh, wow.
he didn't probably had no idea she was an Australian, like none of that. What I'm saying is the Lynch method is about intuition. It's about that meditative mindset, that spiritual third eye. It's like about like, I already know.
You got a good feeling.
The feeling, right. So he sees the picture and the picture unlocks a feeling. And with that feeling, I just know, but then you got to meet the person too, because you need to it's like what he explains is it's like I run through the whole movie in my head as I'm talking to them and I just feel it out. I feel that I feel them here. I feel them here. Maybe I don't feel them here. And that's kind of like, okay, well, we're not going to go that way. But if I keep feeling it, with Naomi was like, I kept feeling it and feeling it every which way. And like, that's kind of like the idea is he sat down, met with her. And like, it sounds like he met with her even a few times because this is like a big part, obviously.
Sure. You should
and
meet.
it just like, yeah. But like, it wasn't like a normal, he never asked her to read a scene. He never asked her even really discuss the character. It was just like, just kind of getting to know her. And the way Naomi describes it is particularly beautiful and moving because she talked about like, you know, the fact that after just so many years of these bad auditions, and this is also Lynch's opportunity to talk about, as we're going to talk about again later, Lynch hates auditions. Like the reason he does what he does is he fucking loathes auditions. Interesting that this movie revolves around auditions, right?
Mm-hmm.
Hates them. So, you know, he's when he's talking to Naomi, like the way Naomi seems to be feeling about it is like, wow, finally there's a person, a director. I never even get to meet the directors most of the time. It's just like I go in a room with a bunch of people that I don't even know that aren't the director of the film, and they just like go, okay, read next. I mean, I don't have to explain it to you, you know.
Yeah.
And after that, it's like, that's it. That's all that it becomes of it. Here's the actual director of the film, not just any director, like a very famous and legendary director, like sitting down and like talking to me not like, pontificating about how awesome they are and about how amazing the movie is, but just like asking me questions about myself and like listening to me and like letting me ask him questions about things and just like having a normal person to person conversation. Like she keeps talking about how he just looked her in the eyes and it just was like so unusual, you know, because she's not used to that. She's used to everyone just kind of being like, whatever, I don't care about you. And so, yeah, you can tell it's a very moving thing. But, you know, she also gets into a little bit about what it was like making the film, which I find pretty interesting, right? So she kept saying, this is going to come up and when we talk about the meanings and intentions behind these things, but she kept talking about how David was always like pushing her to go bigger, particularly when she was Betty in those Betty scenes, and like, which of course made Naomi a little unsure because she was like, am I just like looking like an idiot right now? Is my acting going to come across as like really bad in this movie? Like, why am I constantly beaming, like smiling? Because like, I guess Lynch was like, no, bigger. Act like you're tasting ice cream for the first time and you're a little kid. Like,
well, it's like her fantasy, right? It has to be, right? Those scenes are like what she wants it to be.
Keep it in mind.
So it's got to be real shiny.
I think more or less you're onto it. So we won't get into that right now, but just definitely think about that idea in that context. Either way, her point was like, I knew I just kind of had to trust Lynch. And like the thing was, she also knew from the script, like she had that audition scene and she kind of did understand what that meant to her. And she was like, I just know when I get to that scene, what I feel like I have to do. And if for the rest of the movie, at the time, the pilot that we're filming, I'm acting like a weird little kid with like her eyes beaming, like stupid. Fine, so be it, right? And in a weird way, the movie does feel that way. Like, I think the way she felt on set is how the movie feels, especially the first time you watch it. Like, I remember thinking when I first saw it, I was like, what the fuck is up with the way everyone's acting? It's so weird. So anyway, in a totally different tone, she talks about, and this is important to keep in mind too, like she's talking about filming the angry masturbation scene. Mm-hmm. And you know, she admits it was a very difficult thing to do, but she felt that David Lynch did, go above and beyond to like make sure she was feeling comfortable with it. Like they, closed off the set. They kind of put her under some separate little like tent or something. And just made it so that there really was nobody like around seeing her and anything like that. But at the same time, as she's doing it, they kept going and going and going. And she was like, when the fuck is he going to yell cut? And every time she'd stop, you're like, that's great. And then, but like, never say cut. So she's like, what the fuck? And it was actually getting her angry. And of course, you realize now that he was doing it on purpose to get her angrier so that she would be really angry and upset when she was doing the thing, which, make of it what you will, but it's pretty funny the way she tells the story. And likewise, Naomi has said she's really proud of the sex scenes because like she's glad it's on film. Because I think the implication here is that like she's like, I was in my prime when we shot this.
Oh yeah. Oh, absolutely. So you have evidence of like your hottest self.
Yeah. Very funny.
I should have done that. Dang it.
Yeah, no, she's hilarious.
Too late now.
And this is the other thing she says. It's very important, and also very important just interpreting the movie itself, right? She goes, not everyone needs to get it when you're working with David. It's like, because actors, you want to understand what's going on in the movie. You want to understand your motivations, all this stuff. And she's like, not everyone's going to get it. Like not everything with his stuff has to be logical. Like you don't need, not everyone, not all the actors, not the director. They don't all need the same understanding or interpretation. You just need to find the truth for you, right? So like, it's not important for her or for any of their actors working for him that like they're perfectly understanding what David Lynch's intentions and interpretations are meant to be, right? It just matters that they have something that they can cling on to that's real. I think that makes sense from an actor's point of view.
Yeah. Well, it gives you a place to be grounded from. Yeah.
And look, I think what's really great is that it's just like, you can tell when highly recommend anyone watches the interview I'm referring to on Criterion, because just so you really see, and there's other interviews, I guess, that out there that present the same thing. Like the relationship that Naomi Watts, like how grateful she is to David Lynch, how much she like enjoys his company, how much she like just clearly loves him and he loves her. Like they are like truly like best friends for life, it's pretty beautiful. And I think it's just a reminder to me, and seriously, I'm practically bursting at the seams to do it now. Like I cannot fucking wait for next week to talk about Janie E. Honestly, like probably my favorite thing about The Return maybe is Janie E. And all things Janie E. And again, I think it goes to show, well, I'll say this now, but I'll probably repeat it then. It's like, I pretty much perfectly predicted when it was a top secret and no one knew anything, perfectly predicted both the role of Laura Dern and the role of Naomi Watts in the show, because I just know too much about the way their relationship with David Lynch, what it's like, that I just was like, well, that's going to be in the text. You know what I mean? So like, once you understand that, it's very easy to see where he would go with it. And I was right on both cases, because that's what it takes. All right, well, moving on to highlighting the rest of the cast, because this is really like, to me, like a really interesting murderer's row of character actors and like faces that you see in other things, but maybe aren't like big stars necessarily, but are like really interesting and kind of create this collective thing. So you have Laura Herring, who plays Rita / Camilla. Then you have Justin Theroux as Adam Kesher. And I love Justin Theroux. Are you a fan of The Leftovers?
Yes.
Oh yeah, we'll definitely talk about The Leftovers at some point. We'll do like a Lost Leftovers kind of Lindelof thing.
Justin Theroux has done so many. His resume is so well rounded. Like he's done so much comedy. He's done drama. Like this guy's done producing, writing, all of it. I mean, even remember him in Zoolander. He was amazing.
I think he has also directed too at this point.
He has directed. Yeah. Remember in Zoolander, he's got the one eye. He's like a scratch eye DJ. And I didn't find out that was him for like 10 years. And I was like, wait, that's Justin Theroux? No way.
Yeah, no, it is.
It totally is.
Yeah, no.
You know who else is in this? Patrick Fischler.
Yes, that's who I was about to talk about next.
I love him.
Yeah, no, I love him too. And I was, again, another person that
from Lost.
Yes, he's also in Lost. Also, returns in Twin Peaks: The Return. It's just like one of the great character actors on Mad Men. Just always good, always interesting. It's got that very trademark, like weird smile and eyebrows, which he uses to maximum effect in this film. Another one is Melissa George, who does not speak in this movie, but she's an Australian actress, been in a few things. And she plays the sort of, this is the girl version of Camilla, if you will. Really love her in this movie because she's just like so iconic.
Oh, right.
And we're talk
she's
about
got
all
the
that.
blonde.
Yep,
she's the singer, the nut singer.
Then we have the legendary, absolutely legendary Robert Forster, who is not in this very much. I mean, I'm assuming when they casted him, they're like, oh, well, it's going to be a TV show, so there'll be plenty of time for you to be in future episodes, etc. But that didn't happen. But he, of course, returns in The Return, just like the actor playing his partner, great legendary character actor, unfortunately also deceased now, along with Robert Forster, Brent Briscoe, who plays the detective in this, plays a detective in The Return, just like how Robert Forster ends up being the new Sheriff Truman in The Return. And so they both end up playing cops in Twin Peaks later on, again, investigating the murder case. And it's Brent Briscoe is also great. Are you a Parks and Recreation fan?
Yes, I love that show.
Yeah, so Brent Briscoe.
Was he in Parks and Rec?
Yeah, yes, he is. He plays the recurring character of JJ, who runs JJ's Diner.
JJ's Diner.
Yeah, he's in a lot of things. He's everywhere, or was everywhere, and he's unfortunately no longer is. Another one is, because we mentioned Lost, is Mark Pellegrino, who plays Jacob in Lost. You know who I'm talking about, right?
Yes.
Definitely know what I'm talking about. You're gonna really be like, I've watched Lost, but I don't remember Jacob. The only character they talk about constantly. Yeah, no, I know you remember. Oh, and of course, I'm sure you maybe you didn't, but Billy Ray Cyrus as the pool cleaning guy who's sleeping with Kesher's wife.
Oh my God!
Yes.
I forgot that was mullet. Him. And he's got the mullet. Yep. That was the dead giveaway.
That's the Billy Ray Cyrus. Yeah.
The dead giveaway.
Dead giveaway. And then I'd also like to mention Monty Montgomery, who's not really an actor. He's just David Lynch's friend. Well, he's a producer, but he's David Lynch's friend. And he's the guy who plays the cowboy. And it's really funny because him not being a professional actor, right? He could not remember his lines at all. So they had to like give him cue cards.
Oh no.
Which is a little bit why he has that blank stare, but it's perfect. It's like honestly perfect. We're going to talk more about that scene coming up, but it really is perfect. And he also very notable, brought his own wardrobe. So that cowboy outfit, that's his. And then what that outfit is.
Oh my God.
That's
of course it is.
Cowboy costume from the silent film era worn by the star Tom Mix, who's one of the first Western stars of the silent era. So that David Lynch will tell you that costume is worth a fortune. like,
and he just happened to have it.
Well, because he's like some rich Hollywood guy. So he's like some weird rich Hollywood collector guy. So he owns all that stuff. There are a lot of those types out there. I don't know if you've met them, the like Hollywood collectors.
Yeah, I mean, totally. I get it. My stepdad has a bunch of, there was some, I can't even remember the name of the TV show. There was an old TV show with like a cowboy.
Gunsmoke?
No. And it's like a really famous cowboy, and he has his outfit and his, I can't remember his name. I'll think of it and I'll text him.
Okay. No, it's all good. Last two people I want to cast, I want to mention.
Roy Rogers.
Roy Rogers?
Roy Rogers.
Oh, of course. Okay.
Yeah. So he's got one of Roy Rogers' outfits, and he's got an autograph poster. And the thing is, Roy Rogers' outfit is on a mannequin at all times. It's like on a mannequin thing. So yeah, I get it. My stepdad's one of them. I love you. Hi, Gordon.
Oh, that's beautiful. Okay. Well, you also have Ann Miller and Lee Grant in the film, and Ann Miller and Lee Grant are two veteran actresses of the classic Hollywood period in like the 40s and 50s. And Ann Miller plays Coco, who runs the apartment building. Oh, just call me Coco. Everybody does. And Lee Grant plays Luis, the weird, creepy neighbor in the cloak, who's like, someone's in trouble. Why those two are who they are is something very important that we're going to talk about. I mean, there might be some obvious things coming to your mind, but it goes deep. It goes very deep, Dana. All right. But now let's move on to just kind of really, before we get further into the depth of the film, like just painting the picture that we already alluded to about like the success and dominance of Mulholland Drive, which I think is really interesting. Like this is really considered, check all the lists, one of cinema's all-time greatest and most treasured masterpieces, which, you know, I agree with, like, of course. I think like, you know, this was a movie where the minute I saw it, I was instantly like, this is one of my favorite movies of all time. And compared to like that first time versus like all other times where I'm just like getting more and more and more of it and becoming more and more immersed in Lynch. Because this was my first David Lynch movie. I didn't see any of the other ones before or after this until I saw this one. So like, in a weird way, it colored my perception of all other Lynch things. But yeah, it's just interesting. And you know, it's a singular achievement. And like, honestly, like in my head coming into rewatching it last night, I was like, no, I love this movie. I understand all the claim, but yeah, I think, you know, I don't love it as much as Twin Peaks, but of course it's like unfair to compare the two because
apples and oranges.
But honestly, you watch this movie and then you're like, like, I mean, like there's so much just in here that like, if you engage with it at its most deep, it is almost as deep as Twin Peaks. And I think that's the thing that the advantage Twin Peaks has on Twin Peaks. Like, I mean, you heard our 5-hour podcast. the galaxy brain of Twin Peaks is on a whole different stratosphere. But nevertheless, there's a lot of depth here. And yeah, I think it just cinematically, in terms of like the things David Lynch is doing cinematically, it's the top of his game, though, as we're going to talk about The Return. Like, you include The Return in the conversation about Twin Peaks, or even just focus on The Return alone. It changes that conversation because there's a lot in The Return that's like cinematic, like, whoa, next level shit. So, you know, we'll get that conversation at the end of Lynchtober. But yeah, the film was kind of right away beloved and right away acclaimed and right away successful because it debuted at Cannes and won the fucking Palme d'Or. So there you go. So that was like Lynch's revenge for the last time he was there, or maybe he might have gone with Lost Highway, but you know, when he was, or even The Straight Story, maybe because he's just kind of a Cannes kid, but when he was there with Fire Walk with Me and got booed, you know, which was, you know, of course, awful. Also, just like, even like Roger Ebert was like 4 stars. We all know like how he thought of the other movies. Yeah, I actually was planning on pulling some of his specific quotes on it, but I forgot to do that. So sorry, look it up. Anyway, now the reason I think Mulholland Drive is as beloved as it is almost like a sort of twin, 2 sides of one coin thing. On the one hand, I think it's in some ways, of the like Lynch films that are on the surface or in practice like pretty impenetrable or like quote confusing or like involve like crazy sorts of structural experiments, right? It's the most that's seemingly easy to grasp. Like, once you kind of figure it out a little bit, most people reach the quote what I call the common interpretation pretty quickly, and then it's like, oh, I get it. So on the one hand, it's rewarding to the plebes of the world a little bit more. And on the other hand, it still has that thing Lynch always wanted to have, but in this case, it worked, which is mystery. The mystery of Mulholland Drive to this day endures. And that's, I think, a big part of why the movie's held up so high, because it gives just enough where the plebes can feel like, sorry to be so insulting, but yeah, the plebes can be like, what?
What's a plebe?
Like a plebeian, people who are kind of like lower tier, not as sophisticated.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
Like kind of like Philistine, a little bit different than that, but it's a similar kind of thing. which is also a name of a biblical tribe and so forth. Anyway, it's like enough that you like a lot of people can feel like they grasp it. And like, granted, like I'm not even insulting those people in the sense that like I was that person. We are all that person after like the second or third time you see this movie, I feel like. So like, it's just a matter of, do you go any further than that? And the reason you even can go further is because there is that enduring mystery, but most people, they don't really get much further than that. And I think I'm not insulting that because that's okay. That's why the movie's beloved. It's like, I get it enough so I can wrap my fingers around it and not feel like, fuck this movie. It doesn't feel like, you know, Inland Empire where I'm like, what the fuck kind of acid do I have to be on to understand this movie? It's like, oh, okay, I kind of get it. It's a little bit strange and unusual and it's using dreams and all these things, but I kind of get it. And on the other hand, it's like, well, there's still things. I don't know. What's that about though? So it keeps engaging with you. And I think that's actually a really good recipe and something that if David Lynch wanted to make his art, but be as commercial or like at least as welcoming as possible, it'd be a good template to follow. But David Lynch doesn't follow templates, right? Anyway,
I'd say not.
I will say what's interesting about that, maybe it's because people felt like they quote got it or whatnot. Mulholland Drive is one of the only times David Lynch, actually, as we talked about with Twin Peaks, there is the Log Lady intros, which weirdly enough to me served the same purpose, but it was a little less explicit. But this was explicit. When the DVD of Mulholland Drive came out, there was a DVD insert in the thing, like a little piece of paper that said David Lynch's 10 clues for solving Mulholland Drive. So he actually sat people down and gave them clues because he's like, just pay attention to these things. Of course, the clues being David Lynch clues were not helpful to any of the plebes. If anything, they just took them further afield because they were like, I get it, I think. And then it's like, what the fuck are you talking about? Who cares? Anyway, moving on. So what are the 10 clues? I'm going to name them out here because I'm not going to take the pains. Well, I'm not going to take the pains to address them all individually one by one. I promise you by the end of this, you will have the answers to every single one of these. Okay. So here are the 10 clues. Number 1, pay particular attention to the beginning of the film. At least 2 clues are revealed before the credits. Clue number 2, notice appearances of the red lampshade. Clue number 3, can you hear the title of the film that Adam Kesher is auditioning actresses for? Is it mentioned again? Clue number 4, an accident is a terrible event. Notice the location of the accident. Clue number 5, who gives a key and why? Clue number 6, notice the robe, the ashtray, the coffee cup. Clue number 7, what is felt, realized, and gathered at Club Silencio? I'll just say number 7 is the most important thing of all of them. Number 8, did talent alone help Camila? That's also incredibly important. And number 9, notice the occurrences surrounding the man behind Winkie's. Number 10, where is Aunt Ruth? Number 10 was probably the clue that most people were like, she's away on vacation, stupid. Well, if David Lynch is asking you, don't you think he's saying think again?
Yeah, think again.
Okay. Anyway, I'm not going to address any of that right now. And like I said, I'm not going to try to address them all directly. I think if you follow along with things we're going to talk about, it'll start to become clear. So let's talk about that opening. Not so much what he means with that first clue. I think we'll have to get back to that. But just like the two sort of, because the way this movie is structured, at least at first, is like there's Rita's story, and then there's Betty's story, and then there's a couple little other sort of seemingly vignette stories, and Rita's story and Betty's story become kind of one story once they meet, like about 15, 20-ish minutes into the movie, right? But notice the contrast between our introduction to Rita, who we're introduced to first, and versus Betty, right? Rita, dark and mysterious, ominous, very noir.
Camila?
Yeah. Well, I'm calling her Rita right now because that's what she's known as for the most part in this part of the film. I know, but that's a good little note. I'm going to use the names interchangeably. I have a method to why I use certain names here and there, but that method might not be clear till very much later, and I don't want to belabor the point. If I say Camilla, I mean Rita. If I say Rita, I mean Camilla. Ditto with Betty. If I say Betty, I mean Diane. If I say Diane, I mean Betty. When it comes to the character in the headshot played by Melissa George, who's also called Camila Rhodes, I usually just call her this is the girl, because that's the easiest way to identify her. If I'm talking about the waitress at Winkie's, I'm just going to call her the waitress at Winkie's. I think that should clear it up because everyone else has the same name, right? Good call though, Dana. So yeah,
trying to remember
Rita,
which part of the movie she would be called that and which part she would be called, but that's going to be confusing. Yeah.
No. But I trust me. I gave my translation guide. There's there for everyone. But Rita begins and it's dark and mysterious. It's very noir. She's obviously a brunette. She has this very particular kind of pose to her, even after she gets out of the accident, right? She's in a black dress, for example, etc. Betty, when we meet her, who also has a very particular kind of pose and extenuated posture, is the opposite. Bright and sunny. We see the light. Every light looks like an overhead studio light, even though it's outdoors. It's like the brightest, flashiest, glowiest light imaginable. She's blonde and blue-eyed. She's wearing a pink cardigan. Like I said, her posture is constantly like she's sticking out her chest. Like it's so ridiculous.
The ideation of being perfect, like this idea of being perfect. There you go.
Well, it's just like it's the brightest and campiest kind of thing.
Brightest, bright, happy, perfect, blonde, pink, literally all those things.
Oh yeah, but it's so like what I mean is like,
you know what it reminded me of a little bit.
Yeah,
the appearance of Laura Dern in pink in the light with the blonde hair.
Oh, it absolutely represents the same kind of thing, which is this idealized image, this dream image of that you would get notably from where? From the movies, from Hollywood, from media. This is a big theme that we've been talking about. David Lynch is very concerned about the things we get from the TV, from the film screen, from the radio waves. He is using those instruments himself to talk about the things that we get from those instruments and how they might be lies. Okay. So that's a big overarching theme that's in Eraserhead, Blue Velvet, Twin Peaks, and now Mulholland Drive. So if you've been following with Lynchtober, you should already know this. So I'm not going to bear repeating it too much here because Mulholland Drive has a lot of specific things that are different from those other movies, but that basic core tenet is always there, right? And I think you might notice like the way David Lynch uses sound and specific. And again, it's like the first time I see this movie, I'm like, what the hell is going on? So when Betty is speaking to the old couple in that first scene, you might be like, is the lip sync off? Like, what's going on there? Why does it sound so weird? Why does it sound so like fake and mechanical? It obviously works to play up this overly crazy, campy, like this is almost a bad movie. Like, am I watching a bad movie that's made in bad taste? Well, it's because the lines are dubbed. I mean, it's just exactly what it looks like. The lines are dubbed. You know what I mean? Like,
wow. Yeah.
It's bad ADR on purpose is what I'm saying. She's like, okay, Irene.
But it's supposed to look, it's supposed to be like that, right?
It's supposed to look like that. And right. And we get, so there's even amidst the brightness, there's something unsettling. And that unsettlingness comes from that fakeness.
It feels like this forced.
Exactly.
Soap opera acting, like just very over the top choices and big choices from the characters, which I think might be her idea of perfect television sitcom acting.
Interesting you say that. Yes, it might be her idea of it, right? Exactly. But like that's just what I mean, just like on a very surface level. It's unsettling to you, the audience. And the reason is because you're sensing the fakeness. It's what they call the uncanny valley. It feels like you're in the uncanny valley of the world. Now,
something's just not right.
To increase that to a whole next level in a way that's like not even being subtle about it, about the fact that you're supposed to be like, whoa, this is freaky and ominous. The next thing you see is that old couple now riding in the limo, grinning like crazy in a way that's clearly going to make you feel uncomfortable. And obviously David Lynch is now using the creepier Lynch sound design, like, it's like, you know, so you're just seeing they're grinning like, it's so creepy.
The sound design makes you uncomfortable.
Yeah. But like, I mean, the grins, the frozen grin, it's like the Joker effect. It's the man who laughed, which,
it's like the creepy manicness of it.
Well, Dana, what's the logo of our podcast? It's the man who laughed.
The man who laughs.
Yep. So see, Lynch and we're in sync there. All right. Next thing I want to talk about, speaking of unsettling things, the first of several, I mean, you could argue almost every scene in this movie is perfect in some way, but the first of several truly, truly masterpiece sequences in this movie that, like, if I'm teaching a film class or I'm trying to explain great cinema or just like how to make an audience fucking react, man.
I mean, you are to me right now.
Oh, yeah, true.
To everyone listening. So
True, Dana. Well,
here we are.
Then we got to talk about the fucking Winkie
I brought
scene.
notes, Marcus.
Oh, yeah. I love that you just said that. With a fucking Winkie scene. I'm like, this is turning me into Tarantino to talk about this.
The Winkie scene with Dan.
The Winkie scene, which happens about
That's my favorite scene in the whole movie.
Oh, yeah. It's I think, no, it's mine too. It's mine. I think,
is it yours too?
Yeah, it's probably my favorite
Well,
scene.
I really like her audition scene
No,
too, where you really get to see her
not
acting chops, but it's great.
You're naming all the other scenes that I could choose. And I think if I'm going to give it to, I think it used to be the Winkie scene. Like, right when I saw this movie, like, again, going back 12 years, the first time I saw this movie, this was the scene that shook me to my fucking core. And I was immediately like, that's like the craziest movie scene I've ever seen in a movie. And only later did I come around to like, yes, that scene still has not lost its impact at all. I mean, it doesn't scare me the same way just because I've seen it so many times, but it's still fucking crazy. The scene itself.
Well, yeah, it's kind of like this nightmare of your deja vu's coming true.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, absolutely. But I mean like,
you sense the fear in Dan's eyes when he says, yeah, I had this dream and you were standing right over there. And then later he turns and he's standing right there. And you see this look of like, oh shit. Does that mean that monster is really behind the thing? Right. And the first time you see it, you're like, nah.
Well, let's talk about that, because I think what stands out about this scene really, and that's why I think it's easy to latch on to, but for the right reasons, as being like the best scene when you first see the movie. And then like only later when you start to appreciate more and other things, other Lynchian things too.
What it means. Sure.
Yeah.
It's not what it is, it's what it means.
You get the idea of like, scenes like the audition scene or the Silencio scene, which are a little bit less clear about what's going on. You start to like, those are the scenes that really seep into you and like impact you. But nevertheless, the Winkie scene,
I kind of see those scenes as the Red Room, or as I kind of see like those scenes in this movie as the Twin Peaks, like this film's version of that Red Room, that kind of place of non-reality. From Twin Peaks.
Well, I wouldn't quite say that, but we'll unpack those scenes when we get to them. But just in terms of the Winkie scene, by contrast to those scenes require the full context of the movie. What stands out to me always about the Winkie scene is that this is a short film within the movie. Like, obviously, it's very tied into the meanings and purpose of the movie. It's a location and everything we revisit. It's very important. I'm not saying it is isolated. It can feel that way the first time you see it because you don't know where anything is going, but it works. Like, if you cut out, you just have the scene. David Lynch just made this scene exactly as it is as a short film. It'd be a perfect short film. That's what I'm saying. It's a perfect sequence that on its own, it's a perfect vignette, a perfect short film. So here's the thing. It shouldn't be too surprising, like all great things. It comes from a real place. This is inspired by something that really happened to David Lynch. So apparently he was at the Denny's on Sunset late at night. You know the one I'm talking about, right? By the 101.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. He's there at night, late night. I don't know what he was doing. I guess just eating sausages and pancakes or something. When he walks outside, he, for some reason, maybe it's because where his car is parked, who knows, walks kind of towards behind the dumpster. And some homeless person like steps out and he's scared to like nearly to death. It's like it was the scariest thing that ever happened. So that just seared into his body. Like, it was like, I need to get, that is the nightmare. And that's what the scene is. It's like, you said it perfectly, Dana. It's like the nightmare of your deja vus, like just coming back and back and back. And you're like, cause like, that's the way the whole scene is. It's so perfectly shot and structured. Every time they go to the shot of Patrick Fischler looking over his shoulder and like the sweat down his brow, you're like, oh my God, you're so viscerally put into it. Like, cause he's like, oh, you were standing right over there. And then also the Fred's right over there looking at him like, what? And he's like, you're standing right over there. Cause that's the other thing. So one of the reasons I think this film connects so much with people and they can seemingly grasp it in a way that's like other Lynch films are harder to grasp is because I think this film, and the Winkie Sheen shows this, really feels like most people experience dreams in a way that just feels very universal and very connected, right? Because I mean, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe other people don't experience this, but based on the reaction of the film, I'm going to assume they do. And you can tell me if you experience this, Dana. But when I think of dreams, it usually is that sort of sensation of deja vu. It usually is that thing of like, this thing happened and I'm certain that it happened before, but then it's happening now. And I'm like, is that good? Is that bad? And now another thing's happening now. Is that good? Is that bad? Oh my God, what's going on? Like it's like that sort of thing where you're kind of continually being dislocated. And I think on a macro scale, when I think of this movie and the way people tend to interpret it, there's this thing where dreams often feel like they are the amalgamation of different people and places and things you know from your real life experience being reconfigured to make a point to you, either positive or negative. Usually negative in the sense of like, it might be a positive, happy ending dream, but it's usually to kind of teach you a lesson. I often find the happy ending of my dream isn't in the dream. It's when I wake up and realize that was just a dream. It's like, oh, I got to live through that stress, but it didn't really happen.
Yeah. That relief.
Yeah. Like, oh, that person, like that I got to experience what it was like if that person suddenly like betrayed me and hated me, but like it didn't actually happen. Now, what that says about what my subconscious thinks of the person in question is a different story, but you get the point. Now, let's or do you have anything else you want to know? I guess we didn't talk about the jump scare, which I should mention, because the first time I saw this, that fucking jump scare, the guy coming out is like so fucking terrifying. Yeah. Now I'm so braced for it. It doesn't bother me the same way, but like that is the scariest jump scare of all time. And I mentioned this in my last night in Soho, because that movie had a number of jump scares that were pretty effective, but I'm like, nothing will ever beat that one. The Lynch's one. It's like, he's like, ow! The way he reacts, like he just,
but it's also like he says he never wants to see it in real life, doesn't he?
Yes.
So like it's after he says it, it's almost like he says it, and now because he said it, it happens.
Well, like like I think the first time you watch the movie, you obviously go, oh my God, it's coming. So that feels like it's not a jump scare in that way. But it's really the best of both worlds, because he's built up the terror so much. You're just like him. You're desperate for the relief of like, I'm going to turn around the corner and nothing's going to be there. But no, it's going to be there. Oh man. Yeah. So it's just perfectly created. Anyway, on that makeup job on that guy, which I've seen behind the sets photos for, is pretty disturbing. And you can like smell it, even though you're not, there's no like smell-o-vision or whatever. Okay. Moving on from that sequence, let's talk briefly. I mentioned Angelo Badalamenti actually being in this film, but he's one of the brothers. And I just love the scene of the brothers because, well, the whole espresso thing. I just get such a fucking kick out of it. Meanwhile, I got the Adam with his fucking golf club on the table. And he's like, no way. Just freaking out. It's like, it's not your film anymore. You know?
It's not here. Yeah.
But I love just the slow spitting out of the espresso onto the napkin. He's just like, it's so gross.
Disgusting.
Truly. You also get like, it means our introduction to this whole idea of the conspiracy behind everything, right? And even above the Consigliano brothers, apparently, is this guy, Mr. Rourke, who's played by our friend, well, I hesitate to say our friend because of what's happened to him in real life since, but Michael J. Anderson, who plays the little man in Twin Peaks, right?
Yes,
And
he's in this too.
yes, well, they do a weird thing where they put him in the suit of actually a fairly tall man and sit him in a wheelchair. And so it gives this really weird effect of a little head on a big body. And he's just like kind of their stuff. And I think he's the first one that
Again, meant to make us feel uneasy. Like
uneasy, yes. And the whole way that set is designed, which, you know, when you hear Jack Fisk talk about it, it's great. But like the glass wall, and he's just like kind of in the middle of the room. And then when the one guy has to come up to him, he's like, he says he doesn't want to catch that girl. And then it's just like with the music, the weird sound design, the droning sound. Another great little sequence is the botched hit sequence, the Mark Pellegrino's character, right? And, you know, I don't like to make light of violence. I don't. It's actually quite horrifying what happens, of course. But it is still in that violence. It's like a comedy of errors. It's a very violent comedy of errors where it's like, oops, I accidentally shot the lady next door. Oh, now there's a janitor. Gotta like shoot him now. And it's just like keep going and going and going. Like he's fighting with the big lady. It's like, it's just a funny, and obviously the way the scene starts, we're talking to the guy, he's like shooting stupid. He's like, anyway. He's like, oh, no, cool. And then he shoots him out of nowhere. And I think it, in a weird way, kind of ties to a sort of Lynchian idea that we talk about with Twin Peaks a lot, which is like the disposability of violence in movies and TV. And again, I think it's important more than any other scene. It's important to remember the concept of Mulholland Drive originally as a TV pilot, because again, it would have been another place for Lynch to address that kind of thing where it's like TV violence, overly just indulgent consumability of that violence, etc. I mentioned it earlier too, but I think there's a lot to be said for the Betty Rita sexual tension, like long before the lovemaking scene. Like I just notice it constantly, just like the weird like touching of the hands and like this like deep breaths she's constantly taking when she's like talking to her, like looking at her.
It's a lot of breathing.
She's like, oh my god. Like it's like it's
like a nod to like film noir acting, like the old like like
bit,
so breathy, and like there's something happening. I
think you're right about that part. I think you're right about that part because when they're discussing the mystery and the plot, absolutely, it's like a noir kind of callback. But I also think it's like because you compare it because Rita's very receptive to it, but she's like not really doing it the same way Betty is. It's like Betty, it's all kind of one-sided at first. That's why it's interesting when the lovemaking scene finally happens. It's kind of Rita who initiates it more than Betty. But the way Betty's just like constantly like, oh my fucking god. Or like obviously even the star, the way she like walks in the shower and just like doesn't like lingers mad long. It's like, okay.
Yeah.
It's like no, you should stay. Like, oh my god. Like, do you think like we should talk? Like when she gets on the phone later, to call up like the number for quote Diane Selwyn, and she's like, oh my god, I found an address. Like she's like so like it just feels like it's like she's constantly like just super horny, and like I think in a fucking weird way it's weirdly parallel to what we see of her at the end. Like this is like her the flip side of the fantasy and her, like as I quote described it earlier, angry masturbation scene towards the end. And I have to talk about, we mentioned Theroux, but the character of Adam Kesher, particularly in this first part, is just like, I love it so much. I love the character of Adam Kesher, the whole fucking thing, this whole saga.
The director, eccentric director.
Was more, it is the eccentric director thing. And like you could read it a little bit, I think even by intention, a little bit of like a stand-in for Lynch in some ways. But like it's so funny to like watch him just like the whole thing. He comes home and his wife's in bed with Billy Ray Cyrus, and he's just like immediately like, I'm gonna pour fucking pink paint in your jewelry. like, you know what I mean? Like it feels so Hollywood. It's like that Hollywood kind of fight. Like, you know what I mean? It's like saying, she's like, you're kicked out of the house. Like, no way. And like he's like on the phone with his assistant. She's like, "You can stay with me." And he's like, "I don't think that's such a good idea." Like he's like, I'm laughing about it now, Dana, I'll say, because once we get into the meat of it, none of that will really be funny anymore. I'll just say. But it's funny in the way it's presented, and I laugh at it every time because it is like a lot of things, tone and storytelling. They give us reasons to have different responses to things. We don't always have to take this is very serious. Let's talk about the implications tone. Like it's totally fair. As long as you're willing to have that conversation, it's totally fair to be like, we can make jokes, right? We can laugh. It's an equal form of expression here. Again, that Lynch balance, right? Speaking of things that are funny and intimidating at the same time, we have one of the other great masterpiece scenes, which, as I explained earlier, is weirdly the result of some just awkwardness, really, is the cowboy scene.
Yes.
Yes. Like I said, Mountie Montgomery, not an actor, had to read off cue cards, but I think the effect is like actually one of my favorite performances of anyone in a movie. It's just like, let's say you're on a buggy. Now, how many drivers does a buggy have? That's right, one. So you can come along with me on this buggy if you fix your attitude. I was like, no, did you hear me? No, you didn't. You were too busy being a smart aleck. Now, if you want to stop being a smart aleck and start listening, you could go a long way. like I just love it. Like he's like, he actually, that's the thing I think, to the point about him reading the cue cards, actually does undermine that. I think Monty, being someone who's probably an older guy, lives in Hollywood, like he knows how to kind of like talk down to people, right? Like he probably does have that in him at the ready, and he's able to bring it out, right? Just like the way he's just like, listen, buddy, you better fucking shut the fuck up and start listening to me.
Pay attention.
There's gonna
you know
be
who
trouble.
he makes me think of?
Yeah.
And just because it's Lynchtober and we just did Twin Peaks, but like, imagine he seems like he's the giant kind of being like, you need
Dana.
to like pay attention.
What did you know?
You need to like pay attention, but like he's like a rude cowboy version of the giant. He's like a condescending cowboy giant.
What if
like,
I told you that the giant and the cowboy are very related in terms of what they are meant to
I
represent?
figured he has to be. I mean, he's mirroring the characters. The characters are in everything, so it's like I'm looking for them now.
Good. See, I think your Lynchtober training is working.
My Lynchtober training is nearly complete.
It is nearly complete now, and it is working. Because, there is an important distinction, I think, between what the giant or the fireman and the cowboy represent. And we probably won't get too into that right now, but it's maybe something I'll flag for when we talk next week and we talk more about the fireman in depth. But there is an idea that's related there. And it is interesting the way you were able to point it out. Note, though, another little bit of relation that's not terribly important to Mulholland Drive directly, but I think is important to this larger understanding Lynchtober thing we're trying to do, is what happens when Adam first arrives at the cowboy scene. What do we see? That light on the ranch thing and the sound, the electricity. And when he leaves, the electricity leaves, zaps away, and the light goes out. I won't say much more because it's really not that directly involved to this movie, but I think it has a little bit, would have been a little more involved in a similar sense what I was getting at before, where if you think of Mulholland Drive as originally a TV pilot, there's again probably a little more direct transference of Twin Peaks' lexicon of meanings and interpretations. Now let's talk about one of the big masterpiece sequences. It's really, I'll separate it out because I think the true masterpiece sequence that's probably my favorite is the thing that follows this. But just in terms of like a sequence of scenes that is like really obviously good, kind of at the heart of the movie, I think is the thing that most gets people into the movie. I think especially the first time you see it, because it is the part where things kind of flip, not in the direct way of the structure and the narrative flipping, but in terms of like what your expectation for what this movie can really do flips. What I'm talking about is the audition sequence, which of course is ironic because, as I pointed out, David Lynch hates auditions. The first thing you see is the version that sets you up to think a certain thing, right? Which fits along with the movie you've seen so far, which is you see Betty rehearsing the scene with Rita in her kitchen that morning when she's in the pink robe, right?
Right.
And how do they do the scene? It's very bad, cheesy, corny acting that highlights the bad, cheesy corniness of the writing and the script, and just overall makes you think like, this is schlocky. And I think at this point, you probably are of the mind, looking at Betty and the way she behaves, like Betty's just a kind of a dumb girl who's a bad actor. And, and she's
delusional for thinking she can make it out here with that, if that's what you're giving out.
Exactly.
Oh man, what's wrong with this girl?
So it's really kind of what it proves to be is a sort of bait and switch, really, right? Because when you get the second version of the same scene, it's the actual audition, and it's quote for real, right? And think about this. They even say that, let's do it for real. When she comes in, it's the whole gallery of Hollywood types, right? You have an idiot director, a sleazy old actor, casting directors and their assistants, and just a bunch of weird studio people in like pantsuits are like, oh, hi, lovely to meet you. Like, it's kind of the whole thing in one, right? Like I've been watching Curb Your Enthusiasm this season, and there's a lot of scenes of like Larry having meetings with people at Netflix, and it's like that vibe. There's like 6 people like with clipboards, like, oh my God, we're so hanging on your every word. This is where Betty, and by extension, Naomi Watts, which I think is really important. Because remember Naomi Watts' trajectory at this moment. Naomi Watts is an actor that no one's ever heard of when they see this movie, because she was never really cast in jack shit before it, right? And up until this point in the movie, she's been playing a character who not only seems like she's a bad actress as a character, but kind of makes you question if Naomi Watts is a good actress, because it's like the performance is so over the top and cheesy, right?
That's a fair statement.
She's like, wow, I just got here from Deep River, Ontario. And now it's like I'm in this dream place. Like, right? Well, guess what? Motherfuckers, we've been fucking with you this whole time, baiting you so you get the punch, right? Because this is where Naomi and Betty, but really Naomi, gets to reveal her true power level, as we might say in like a Dragon Ball Z episode, her true power level to the whole world, right? And it's like full blown, like power up, the fucking energy surging, like the screaming. It's over
100%.
The whole meme is
she
right
runs
there.
the gambit. She runs the gambit in that performance and that scene.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's like, so if you're sitting in that audience, right, you are getting that full impression right then and there, that moment, right? You're like, holy shit. And then it's congruent with the reaction in the room in the movie, right? Because as soon as they break, it's like, everyone's like, where the hell did you find her? She's incredible. Oh, all that stuff, right? And so, yeah, it's like this truly dynamite moment. I mean, I don't know, like, talk to me for a second, though, about like, what for you as the actor's actor here, right? Like, really stands out to you about the way that scene's played, or like maybe it doesn't hit you that strong. I don't know. You didn't really say.
No, it absolutely hit me very strongly. Being able to, like walking in and knowing that she's uncomfortable from the get-go. The moment you walk in the room, the fact that everybody's sitting there across the table judging you makes you uncomfortable. I don't care who you are. You're still going to feel judged when you walk in a room like that. So there's that level.
Oh yeah. And she plays it nervous.
Yeah, absolutely. She does play it nervous, as she should, because she is nervous. And then this actor is this kind of like gross, creepy, old dude, and this is your big challenge. Pretend that he's not. And that you're into this because that's what's going to get you this job. Because that's what's going to get you for them to believe that you are this character, is you have to get this guy to believe.
Well, I would say, I think I obviously agree with everything you just said, and it's very well put. There is an extra little layer, though. I can't get too much into it yet because we have to explain really the whole keys. We still haven't talked about any of that yet. But once we get to that, this will make sense. But I can kind of suggest towards it, or feel the need to right now, to say the way Betty plays it and the way the scene really is, and that's the interesting thing, right? It shows you the power of acting. Because remember how I said when you see it the first time, and it's the bad acting, it also leaves you the impression that the script is really bad, which isn't to say the script is now suddenly good, but all of a sudden,
it's just
a layer
shows you
of
the power of the
complexity.
actor.
But like a layer of, but I think there is a layer of complexity in the wordplay that comes out a little bit more when the performance is modulated a different way, right? And that's why, like, from the perspective of a director, you are trying to direct a scene a certain way because you realize that relationship. You realize how a scene can just totally come across not the way even the writer or intended, and certainly not you, the director, assuming you're different people. And if you're the same person, then, you know, it's obvious, right? Intends something to come out, right? And once we kind of get into what that key is to unlock the whole sort of the entire codex of the film, you'll realize that there's a whole nother layer of meaning to what's going on in that scene and why that performance change is meant to really highlight to you where that meaning difference is. And so Naomi's reaction, the intensity of it, what I'm getting at is, it's not just that she's like, now she's into it when she has to play, she's into it when this guy is a sleazy creep. It's more like,
no, she's the character.
Well, she's the character, but it's also, to me, more like, I'm disgusted with myself. I mean, she literally says that, I hate us both. Right. So what I'm alluding to is that there's a reason that's in the scene. I'll just leave it there for now. Now, the interesting thing is the immediate follow-up to that, which transitions us to the next scene we're going to talk about, which is the big thing I want to talk about. Is she gets the casting director and her like little, I love the way her assistant's wardrobe is, right? With the leather jacket and the black thick glasses. It's like, and the fucking bangs. It's like so perfect. Like, yeah, I'm like the hipster assistant who's just like, I don't fucking care about anything. like it's perfect. It's perfect. And she's for the casting director too, because she's like, oh, I was married to him. I would know. I was married to him for 15 years. It's like that classic thing where everyone in Hollywood is like, knows each other, was married to each other at some point, right?
Definitely work together. Yeah.
Right. But I love how she's like, they're totally shitting on the whole thing, saying how the movie's a disaster. It's never going to get made. How Wally's over the hill, all this stuff. And Betty's like, because she's like, oh, I thought I nailed the audition. So she's all, like, oh, don't worry, you were great. And she's like, we're just get a little catty. That's what she says. And it's like, it really is that point, even though we're still in the kind of the dream of Hollywood, as I'll explain. Like, it is that little moment where it feels almost a little too real. Like the whole sort of ethos of that relationship, what it would be like to kind of be around those people, which obviously David Lynch and anyone making this would know, kind of really comes out to bear, right? And that brings us to the actual scene that I was alluding to before, which I consider to be the kind of masterpiece sequence of all the masterpieces.
Your favorite scene?
My favorite scene, yeah, which is this is the girl scene, right? And what I mean, not the first time you hear it, the whole basically the screen test sequence, right? Where Kesher is screen testing, and there's two different people that come through. The first one comes through and she's doing the 16 reasons. Right?
Oh, for a second, I thought you meant that this is the girl scene in the cafe where Diane says this is the girl with the headshot.
No. I just call
it
it this is the girl sequence because Adam finally says it there,
Adam
which is like the whole thing that's been building up in his story, right? So if you've been listening to the pod and following Lynchtober, you know that this sequence forms the basis of our Lynchtober intro. Like I layered in other things from Twin Peaks and stuff into it, but the basic spine is this sequence, and it's because the sequence is just masterful, right? And particularly attention the way it's like cut together and the way the camera works, right? Because you have these very particular push-ins. Because what's happening in the scene is you have Kesher doing the screen test for the Sylvia North story, screen test to replace the actor that dropped out. Now, the implication you might be thinking is the actor is Camila, who's the one who's missing, et cetera, et cetera. All that really doesn't matter because it's all not what's really going on, more or less.
It's just kind of the misdirection, right?
It's kind of the misdirection, exactly. But the point, what is going on is that he's doing this screen test, which is, again, some people might point out that that's a little bit overly done, but they were in the middle of filming. So there's an actor, she's doing 16 reasons. She got like 4 backup singers with her. And that's the way the scene starts. So immediately the scene puts you into that. This is why it stands out to me. It's so quintessential Lynch, that thing that we've been talking about where it's the 50s, it's the radio waves, putting that thing out in the air, right? That sense of like, oh, it's all wonderful. Like everything in heaven is fine, right?
Everything in heaven is fine. Oh my God.
Everything in heaven is fine.
That is
And
the vibes we get.
yeah, you're getting that. And meanwhile, behind the scenes, like Kesher is flop sweating, nervous because he knows like this actress who he's clearly friends with, because after she breaks, you like have like a good rapport. She's like, I'm gonna get this part, you'll see. And he's like, he knows. No, you're not. No, you're not, because you're good, because the girl I haven't even seen yet, who I've never fucking heard of, already has the part promised to her, right? And he's sitting there, and this is right when Betty and the casting agent, because they remember they're bringing her over here from the previous thing we were just talking about, saying like, oh, don't even worry about that movie. That movie's trash. We have a much bigger movie that you'll be perfect for. We'll introduce you to the director. He's a real big shot, right? They bring her over, and that's when I'm talking about where you get these amazing push-in shots, right? Where you're pushing in on Naomi Watts, you're pushing in on Kesher. It's the girl comes out, and you're hearing that more mysterious, like kind of Lynch, like kind of sound design when she comes in, and like that girl played by Melissa George, right? She's very stiff. Her eyes are overly wide. She like looks like very uncomfortable and confused, right? Mm-hmm. She's just like walks out to the microphone, and she doesn't have the backup singer. She's just by herself. And then you hear the first little cues of every little star, right? And the way the sound is mixed is very particular, because the sound mix comes in, it's like kind of soft, like the emphasis is still on the dialogue. It's like enough to hear it, but it's not at too high a level. You almost won't notice it. You'll think it's at the right level, kind of, right? It's at the same level that 16 Reasons was, more or less, right? And Kesher's like, okay, he's like getting tense because he knows like, okay, this is it. This is the girl. And when it cuts from that, like shots of Kesher just kind of like wiggling in his seat to the flat, straight up Melissa George looking into the camera shot, is timed right to when the first chorus line drops, right? And all of a sudden the sound mix cranks up all the fucking way. So then immediately the song takes up a huge new dominance in your ears. And that just creates this effect that's with that cut and with her looking right in the camera, immediately like warps you into like, holy shit, you're in some mesmerized trance. Like you just fucking warp speeded right into David Lynch's weird 1950s hallucination, right?
Yeah.
like,
yeah.
Like,
Dreamland.
Yeah. Well, it's more than dreamland, because you feel like you're in dreamland all the time, but it's like, this is, it's just so intense. It's like, because that song in The Return is
I think this is the part where I was telling you, I feel like it's sort of like a different version of the Red Room, because it's like a weird vibe, strange things are happening. Obviously not in the extent as it is in Twin Peaks, but it's sort of like you're in another environment. Because you're in another environment once you pass this threshold. Yeah. And in Twin Peaks, it's the curtains. You enter the curtains, and in Mulholland Drive, in this particular instance, I think it is that beat drop. The beat drops, and you're in that's the threshold. No,
Dana, I think actually you're very spot on with that again.
Really?
Yes. I'll tell you why. I didn't really understand what you meant before, but now I do. So that's kind of what I'm getting at. And it is that between two worlds feeling. It's not meant to necessarily like situate you in that same sort of meaning and intention that it is in Twin Peaks. But what it is meant to do is subconsciously kind of bring you into that space of what I'm talking about, where if you were kind of in your seat, right, and the theatrical experience in mind, this part would have been shot for the pilot, but still, right, when he's actually sound mixing it, like I'm talking about at that point, it's where we're talking about. And you're kind of like, how do I get my audience to really adjust themselves? Because Lynch loves to talk about that experience. Like it's a really delicate dance where you're in the seat and the screen is big and the sound is loud, and it's a very delicate thing. But if you get them in that space, you are in the dream, right? And I think this was him really taking his own perception of that to heart and really trying to make sure he nailed that, because if you nail that, then you really kind of just on a subconscious level, forget whether you're able to track and follow the rest of what I'm saying. On a subconscious level, you understand something about the power that this kind of experience can have over someone. And I think where you come in with the Red Room is you are also seeing the mechanics of how behind that curtain, right, behind that veil into the background, behind that door, right, all the dirty deals are being made to make this happen. It is When it comes to your screen, it doesn't come there with little dolls who are perfect and have no souls. It comes there because of truly ominous and dangerous things behind that curtain, right?
Right.
And we're going to talk about much more explicitly what I mean by that, because in order to do so is the only way to actually understand what the fuck this movie's about. Because it is like with Twin Peaks, it's about something very sinister, in fact. But that's kind of getting into on a subconscious level it's alluding to. And that's, I think, why it's very important the way Melissa George approaches that stage is you sense the discomfort. You sense the, oh, I don't know where I am. Like maybe I'm on a roofie. but the minute the minute the director yells action and the camera's locked on me, I am in a trance. I am going there.
Right.
Yeah. And of course, it's obviously also an important scene because of the role that's playing in Diane's or Betty in this case's story. And that's why you get those brilliant kind of super close up shots of the tight eye lines, right? Where she's looking at Kesher's looking at her. The implication is supposed to be like, well, he might have already told the bosses this is the girl in that perfectly wry tone. Mm-hmm. He's already kind of like regretting his decision because he's like, look at that girl. And the way the backlighting is on Naomi Watts when she comes in there, right, with her blonde bob. That's what I mean about the power of that push in. It's just like, it's perfect. And we'll talk about it in the content. Oh, I'll just say it now. You don't quite see it here because it's just her in her blue, like sleeveless, right? But you'll notice she's wearing a gray skirt. When she runs off because she needs to meet Rita to go check out Diane Selwyn's apartment, right?
Uh-huh.
In that scene, what is she wearing? She adds a layer that we didn't see before. I guess she was holding it in her arm, but we didn't see it on her, right? It's a gray jacket, completing this gray suit. What does that resemble? Obviously, complete with her blonde hair and pearls, resembles Kim Novak in Vertigo, right? This is Lynch laying it on thick with the idea of this movie's obviously taking a heavy amount of inspiration from Vertigo. We're definitely going to do an episode on some point. It's one of my favorite movies of all time. It's and another movie that's usually number one or number two or number in the top 5 of every like greatest movie of all time list. Hitchcock's film starring Jimmy Stewart and Kim Novak. The point is, when I say this, what's significant here is Vertigo is about a woman who changes appearance and then later changes appearance again to this idealized version in Jimmy Stewart's mind, which is this look that is blonde hair in that gray suit specifically, right? So in other words, it's drawing your attention that Betty is this idealized Hitchcockian ideal of a movie lead, right? And what's she doing? She's sleuthing around looking for mystery. And who's with her?
She does also wear those cardigans, which I think adds to the Hitchcockian-ness of it, like those little
there's a little
cardigans.
bit of like a 60s thing there, I guess.
Vibe,
I always
like
looked at the cardigan as more symbolic, and definitely in period of like late 90s, more symbolic of her just like kind of like, I'm an every girl kind of thing, right? Because that's what's important to remember why I'm drawing your attention to the gray pantsuit. Because up until this point, she's just been wearing that look, and it's this very every girl look, this very plain Jane, Deep River, Ontario, every girl look. Now she's a movie star look. Now she's Kim Novak. See? So I think that's more the intention there, if anything. That being said, yeah, her just overall appearance, her blonde bob is definitely meant to be kind of early 60s Hitchcock era. I can definitely see that too, or think that's correct. But she's paired with what? The dark-haired brunette femme fatale named Rita, as in Rita Hayworth, star of Gilda. So like you see what I'm saying? It's like Rita Hayworth, Kim Novak, Hitchcock, film noir. It's like it's drawing you right into all those things and the contrast between them, right, as they slip around. Now, after this scene is where the whole movie starts to flip out. Oh, one other thing I just want to know. It's like a very small thing, but just a nice little screen pairing that if you've seen some of the poster work from Mulholland Drive is used a lot. Betty's undershirt's blue. Rita's is red, blue, red, opposites, which if you also seen Last Night in Soho, the use of the red, blue light flashing is heavy in that.
Sure.
Anyway,
Wow.
The whole movie flips once after that sequence. What does Rita do? She says, I need to change my hair, change my look. Another Vertigo reference, right? But this time since she's already a brunette, she adds a blonde bob wig that makes her look like who? Betty. So her and Betty now are, I mean, they don't really look like this, but just go with me. They're kind of twins. They're kind of doppelgangers.
Oh my gosh.
Yes. And so for the next little chunk of the movie, that's what they are, kind of in a lot of ways. Now, we know Rita takes off her hair to do what? Get naked in bed and have sex with Betty. Which, brings us to the sex scene. And David Lynch will tell you, because like remember I was telling you how Naomi Watts was like, oh, I'm very proud of that scene. He was like, well, it's a very important scene. It's a love scene. It's really important. It sounds like he's doing the thou protest too much. This scene is really important for the plot meme. You know, that's a meme. This scene is very important for the plot. But I think in Lynch's case, he's very sincere about this, and it is important. Like, it's more important in what it's questioning, right? Because if you follow along with what I've been saying, it's like, what is really going on here? And it's like, is this who's Betty in love with? Because she says, I'm in love with you. But this is Rita, a woman with no identity who she barely knows. Right. And obviously, like I said, the sexual tension, she's been clearly like constantly. That's another thing I didn't mention that Naomi Watts is constantly doing, biting her lip. Right.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
She's like constantly biting her lip, like heavy breathing, like it's a little over the top, but it really works. It seeps in your mind, right? Subconsciously. This is a very horny movie is what I'm getting at. And
Sure.
She says, I'm in love. Like, who's she in love with? An idea, a memory, a dream, or as I will reveal to you later, well, I guess I already said an idea. So that's the same thing as an idea. Yeah, I'm going to say it's an idea more than it's even a memory or a dream, but I'll get to that. That brings after the sex scene, all of a sudden, Rita's laying in bed and she's like, Silencio, Silencio. Right. So after the sex with Rita leads to Silencio. I'm just drawing those threads to keep in your mind for when I start explaining this going forward. But we then go to Club Silencio. By the way, gotta shout out those shots leading up to that transition. Like the shot of them on the corner of Alta Vista and Sunset, which like is a block away from me.
Yes.
They're like right facing Bossa Nova. It's so funny to look at that shot. And it's like the lights are really bright and there's like a weird push in and just like very wide shot. And then you get the door of Club Silencio with that blue light and the camera just fucking flies right at it and the blue door shuts. Very just like experimental Lynch shots, right? Now, let's talk about what actually goes on Club Silencio, because shouldn't surprise you given the way the scene plays out. This is the most important scene in the movie, right? This is the heart of the movie, is this scene. So, guy is on stage. It's like, and what does he look like? A magician. Remember I was telling you about Twin Peaks about the magician? It's all a recording, right? And if you've been following along, what is he saying? It's all a movie. This is all for you. This is all pre-made. It's controlled, right? But then what happens? Then a woman gets on stage, and this is Rebecca Del Rio. Now, she's called the movie Rebecca Del Rio, but Rebecca Del Rio is the person's real name. It's the singer's real name.
Oh, is it really?
Yes. And this, like a lot of things I've situated with Twin Peaks, is important because it gives you the idea of there's the movie, it's all a recording, and then there's reality. But reality is still part of the movie and is controlled the same way, right? Because when Rebecca Del Rio dies on stage, the recording continues, right? Now,
right. She keeps singing even though she's dead.
Yes. Now, what is she singing? I mean, you speak Spanish, so this probably didn't caught your attention in a lot of easier than me.
Oh, I actually don't remember what the lyrics were.
She's singing this Roy Orbison song, Crying, in Spanish. Now, I mentioned this song way back when we did Blue Velvet because the Roy Orbison song In Dreams is in Blue Velvet, but originally David Lynch wanted it to be Crying. Crying is one of his favorite songs. Now, he realized In Dreams made way more sense for what the idea was in Blue Velvet. How he came back to crying, and specifically Rebecca Del Rio singing it in Spanish, is, and I'm not sure the total circumstance of what brought this moment, but seemingly it had nothing to do with Mulholland Drive. Rebecca Del Rio came to David Lynch and demoed her singing this exact song, the exact way you hear it. And they had no prior connection before this. Obviously, some circumstances must have happened to get her in this room. Like she knew someone who got it, like whatever. But David Lynch, you have to understand, has been getting increasingly at this point involved in music, right? Now, Lynch heard it, and like a lot of things with Lynch, he heard it once and knew that's it. That's it. That's what I needed. Because he already had the idea of the Club Silencio scene, but he's like, that's the thing that'll make the scene really work. So, and I'll note Rebecca Del Rio returns in The Return, singing another very important song, "No Stars," written by Lynch, in that movie, or that movie, TV show, whatever. But yeah, and she's also playing herself, quote, in that. So here's the idea that I'm not going to get too into what I mean. It's kind of like the thing I'm going to circle back to once we've put all the pieces in place. But just really think about the idea of what we've already seen. Pay attention. Silence. Movies. Crying. A woman dying on stage. Think of those things and think of the reaction that we see of Betty and Camilla, who's back to wearing her Betty wig, notice, crying. Obviously, the song's called crying their eyes out, shaking, fearful in the audience. Like they're seeing something that means something to them, that they recognize, that they know, and it breaks them. And what does it do? Because what happens after this? They go home and all of a sudden the blue box opens. And Betty disappears too before the blue box opened. It's Rita who opens the blue box, not Betty. And the blue box opens, and that's when we take our thing to the other side. That's where the quote dream ends, right? And we also see notably Aunt Ruth walk into the thing being like, where is everybody? And it's gone, right? So something died, something ended. Boom. Okay. Just keep those ideas in mind if it's not clear where I might be going with this. But now let's talk about just the scenes on the other side. So we now meet the sweaty. I'm really highlighting sweaty because, oh man, is there a lot of sweat. The sweaty, desperate, broken Diane. Like even when she's not angry masturbating, she is sweaty. Like her shirts are soaked in sweat.
It's like a greasy look on her hair too.
Yeah,
like
greasy hair, sweaty, wearing that ratty bathrobe.
Mm-hmm.
Not a good look. Obviously.
Maybe like real life.
Yeah.
Betty.
Well, yes, and I'll explain more in a moment, but it is quote real life, or at least an idea of real life, right? That's maybe the more accurate.
It seems like the most reflective of real life compared to like this acting was like perfect and everything's shiny and
it's
her
hard
hair
to know
perfect
exactly,
always.
Yeah, the
you can't really tell where the line is.
The contrast is immediate and extreme, and it's definitely by intention, right? Because you immediately like, even before she speaks, even before you hear anyone call her Diane, when you just see those shots of Naomi Watts, the way she's sitting on her bed all ratty, you're like, that's not the same person. Right?
Well,
Immediately,
it made me think of like
that.
the duality of Hollywood. Like, and I think Instagram is a good example of this thing where like you only see what people want you to see, this perfect shiny image, but the truth behind it is typically much darker.
Very good, Dana. Yeah. Thank you.
Do I get it?
I think, yeah. Oh, yeah. I'm giving you your little checks here and there about when you're showing that you're on the right track. Yes. But here's where it gets important. Okay. So after we're introduced to Sweaty Diane and it's revealed Sweaty Diane is sleeping with Camilla, who we now know her as, right? And then Camilla is like kind of breaking up with her or whatever. After all that's kind of settled and revealed, we then get a return to seemingly the beginning of the story. But now it's Diane sitting in the back of the limo instead of Camilla/Rita, right? And the same dialogue seems to repeat. But what happens instead is there's no car crash. Instead, Camilla comes down these steps and opens the car door and says to her, she says, shortcut. this is the most important line in the movie. One of the most important lines. Shortcut. And she like then takes Diane by the hand as she's walking up. It's like, this is the secret path, the beautiful way. And it leads them up to the house. So in other words, the car that was going up to the house stops prematurely. And then she gets out and takes the shortcut, the steps directly up, leads her right into the backyard pool area of Kesher's place, right? So that's where you realize, oh, that's Kesher's place. Oh, now I get it. Interesting, right? Think of it like this. And this is, again, I'm going to explain a little more, but this is the shortcut to what? To the Hollywood elite, to the top of the hills. And when she are in this little party at Kesher's place, a couple things are revealed to you that are interesting. I mean, many things are revealed to you that are interesting in this scene. Like, this is the kind of the scene where even the first time you're watching it, we're like, oh, wait, that's that. That's that. That's that. That's that. That's that. That's that. Everything you thought you knew, you're seeing it now being reorganized, right? So it's revealed that Diane won a jitterbug contest and then came to LA after her aunt died. So in this version, like, so think of the very first shot of this movie. Remember I said David Lynch said there's two clues right in the first scene. Before the credits roll is what he said. The first thing you see is that crazy people dancing thing. That's the quote jitterbug contest. And then you see like a shot of like what appears to be happy-go-lucky Betty, or you could say Diane, like, woo, I won. Then you get a sequence of what looks like from a first person view, someone crashing into a pillow. I'll get back to the crashing into the pillow thing, but those are the first two things you see. So in other words, David Lynch had told you in his little official clues, those are clues. And he asked, where's Aunt Ruth? Well, we hear here, Aunt Ruth is dead. Okay, interesting. Now, the important thing we learned is that Camila got the part on the quote Sylvia North story. I remember another one of David Lynch's clues. What was the name of the thing that Camila got the part in? Sylvia North story. Interesting. The director, though, was not Adam Kesher. When they talk about this, they say a different name. Well, we'll get back to that name, but it's not Adam. And that director apparently didn't think so much of Diane, is what she says. He didn't think so much of it. Then we see this is the girl, Melissa George, the one who sung Every Little Star, come up to Camila and kiss her. And obviously makes Diane very rage jealous, right? I mean, you see the lipstick on her lipstick and it's very weird, right? But she kind of looks at her like a little, again, with that weird wide-eyed, like nervous look. Then right after that, what you see cowboy spotting number 3. Remember what the cowboy said to Adam? One more time.
2 times is bad, 1 time is good.
You'll see me one more time if you do good.
You'll
see
good
me two more times if
you
do bad.
Do bad.
Right? So we're now seeing him a 3rd time, which means we've seen him 2 more times since then. The second time in the middle is in the transition after the blue box opens. You see the cowboy come to the doorway of sleeping Diane, is like, wake up, pretty girl. That's what he says, right? So like I said, this is the 3rd time you're seeing him.
Which was what made me think of him as the giant. Comes to you when you're sleeping, tells you stuff.
Yes. That's actually a good point.
That's why I thought comes to you and tells you to pay attention while you're sleeping.
Yes. He's someone who comes to you and you're, yes, that's true. In dreams, I walk with you, as we say, right? Then we get the whole the reveal of this something rotting and terrifying at Winkie's, which before we even get back to the monster behind the thing, we see Diane sitting with Mark Pellegrino's hitman character, this was the scene you thought I was talking about, presents the picture of Camila, and says Camila Rhodes, and points us that this is the girl. He then gives her a blue key, a different blue key than the one that we saw before, but we see that blue key again on Diane's coffee table. And so that, again, is to kind of very simple, and everyone seems to get this. That's symbolizing that she paid to have Camila assassinated, and the key is left there because he did the job. He did the job, right? Which then brings us to the end of the film, which is Diane is chased by the crazy old couple with the grinning smiles. She starts screaming like crazy until she can't get away from them. They won't stop. So she reaches into her drawer, pulls out a gun, and blows her head off. And then as the smoke rises from the bed, and it turns blue, we then are presented with the big Mulholland Drive emotional theme, like the shots of Betty and the glowing lights along with Camilla, like, oh, like, remember what we could have been, the great stars. And then it turns back to the blue-haired lady in Club Silencio, blue lights flashing on her. And she says, one more time, Silencio. Shh. Movie ends. Right? So, obviously, the last word of the movie is Silencio.
Silence.
Silence. What kind of silence are we talking about here? This is the big question we're going to now start unpacking. But before we do, let's just recap what I call the common interpretation of the film so we can clearly denote the way most people tend to perceive the film. This is what I mean about like, oh, you know, someone sees it the second, third time. This is usually what they end up saying. And if they go online, they're going to find 2,000 other people that say the same thing. So they're going to be like, oh, right. Okay. That's all I need to know. Right. I get it. I solved the movie. Simple. Right. Forget David Lynch's 10 clues. Forget the rest of it. I get it. This is all I need to know. So here's how it lays. And Dana, if any of this sounds like more or less what you think, let me just say, like, it's not a big deal. Everyone gets this point. And what I'm saying is not that even this is entirely wrong. There are parts of it that are right, parts of it that I would say might quote qualify as quote wrong. But it's really more about like taking this as your baseline and going way deeper with it because there's so much more to it, right?
Right.
Okay. So the common interpretation is that Betty and her story is a dream and Diane is her reality. So Diane dreams of her life as Betty, right? And what we're seeing for most of the film is that dream, and then that dream ends and we're left back with Diane, and then the film, kind of in an out of sequence way, you know, you could call it flashbacks, explains the story of Diane, how she got to the point where she decided to have Camilla assassinated, who was her ex-lover, who she's jealous of. And right, so what the dream ends up doing is like the dream, like I was saying about takes details of the real and configures them. The dream takes details of that real life that Diane lives and reconfigures them as a way for Diane to cope with her guilt for ordering the hit on Camilla. And that's right. Camilla's this actress she had been sleeping with, but became jealous of because she gets all the big parts and she's getting married to the big shot director and hooks up with other girls right in front of her. And so she's like, oh, fuck that bitch. I'm going to get her killed. So, but of course, because Diane's maybe not a terrible person, she immediately regrets doing that. And so she's consumed with guilt and she dreams of a dream to rewrite history, to like make her not so consumed with guilt. So in the dream, it's like, no, don't worry. It's not your fault. All the stuff that happened.
Oh, it's like in the dream, Camilla gets away.
Camilla gets away and everyone else was out to get her, not you. You're her best friend. You love her, right? All that stuff. But the dream ends. And because the dream ends, like it doesn't for all of us, we have to wake up to reality. She's left with her actual guilt that she can't escape. So she starts to hallucinate or be haunted by the darker aspects of that dream. And it drives her nuts. And she ends up killing herself. And that's even something the quote dream itself predicted, remember? Because they find the dead body of Diane. So the dream just like kind of predicted that she was going to kill herself and then she killed herself. And that's it. That's it. That's the whole interpretation. That's all you need to know. That's it. But
does that, so actually it's like she dreamed she's going to kill herself and she killed herself.
Yeah.
And Dan dreamed he was going to see the cafe.
I'm drawing attention.
Monster.
Yeah. I'm drawing particular attention to that idea that she dreamed she's going to kill herself and then she did. Part because like, while I'm sure that does happen, unfortunately, that's the part that I think gives away the game a little bit, that like, maybe it's not so directly that, right? Maybe there's more, there's a lot more. And again, if we go back to David Lynch's 10 clues, there's a lot in those clues that doesn't seem to be super relevant to this interpretation, interestingly, right? Before I illuminate what I think is more of what's going on here and start talking about a favorite source of ours in terms of like how we might get to that conclusion, let's just go back and explain something I skipped over before. And I skipped over it because I wanted to just set people's minds up with, the reality of how this film came together, because it's quite interesting. It's another example of the way David Lynch kind of develops his work out develops his work out of like the organic situation of what he's dealing with, right? So when Mulholland Drive first began, it started out as a TV pilot. We already kind of said that, but I also mentioned this on an earlier episode of Lynchtober, perhaps the Twin Peaks one. It goes back even further. The original genesis of the Mulholland Drive was the intention to do an Audrey Horne spinoff of Twin Peaks, right? Yeah.
Cool.
So the idea was Audrey Horne, after all the shit with Billy Zane and I guess the bank explosion, moved to Hollywood to become an actress. And that was the idea. So Lynch was working that, I believe, with some help from Mark Frost. I don't know if Mark stayed on the project or what, but this was something he was developing with ABC. Like, right, okay, maybe Twin Peaks will die, but I'll do something else, and this could be it. It'll continue the world of Twin Peaks. So just think about that when you think about Mulholland Drive is Twin Peaks, but Hollywood. You know, like at its core genesis, it was going to be something like that. Now, Twin Peaks kind of became not only a toxic entity to probably ABC, but also just to David Lynch himself, because he was like, after Fire Walk With Me, he was like, as we talked about when we talked about that, you've broken my heart for the last time. I have to leave Twin Peaks behind. But he still, you know, had developing material and had the ability to develop new things with ABC because they were like, well, we love you, David, you know, that usual bullshit. So he's like, okay, I will develop a new show, and I like this Hollywood idea, so I'm going to continue to pursue that. Fast forward a few years later, 1999, he's finally able to get a green light to shoot a pilot based off this idea. And at that point, the script's called Mulholland Drive. It's the story of Betty meets this amnesia girl who she starts calling herself Rita. It's basically everything we see up until the sex scene. Right? Everything you see up until the sex scene is what is more or less on with some little exceptions or add-ins here and there, more or less the exact pilot as it was shot and scripted, right? So that pilot, right? He submitted that to the execs at ABC. I don't think this was Bob Iger at the time. It was some other exec, or at least David Lynch didn't specify. But the way David Lynch tells this story shows you his ire for the situation. He said, executive at ABC, watching it, drinking a cup of coffee, likes that part, but everything else, drinking a cup of coffee, standing up, pacing around on the phone, that the TV in the background, volume not even up high. And he's going to sit there and then tell me he doesn't like it. So it's like, that's not how you watch it. like, so in other words, this guy just like kept like looking over his TV. I don't know what's going on. Fuck it. Crap. I mean, I think it's indicative of the way a lot of TV was talked about that. It's like, I don't know. It's like, repeat the same plot points over and over again. So if I like not paying attention at all, every time I do look up for my coffee and phone, I'll just get a quick recap of what's going on. Okay, they haven't caught the killer yet. Cool. Keep going. Bullshit. Or I hear a laugh track, so I know to laugh. Yeah. So yeah, it didn't work out, and it was rejected. So that might have been the end of it. And like the way things work with pilots that don't go to air is like the studio basically takes all the sets, they dismantle them. They're like, we'll put them in storage and we'll like basically recycle them or break them break them up and completely. So you'll lose everything eventually. And that's what was going to happen with Mulholland Drive. All the stuff was put in that process and it was like, yep, it's on the chopping block to be reused when needed. And around the time David Lynch, remember I said, everything is always the French. The French came in and saved him again. This guy, Pierre Edelman, one of his French movie producer friends, was like, oh, okay, I'll raise you money to like complete it and we'll turn it into a movie. And he's like, okay, yep. But it took a year and a half to get the money together. And so in that time, it was like a lot of sets and costumes were lost, which is not great. I mean, you kind of can't tell. It feels like they got it all more or less what they needed. But the main thing is by the time a year and a half passes, I guess Lynch wasn't all that optimistic in the first place that this was really going to go down, which might explain it. He had literally no ideas about like what he was actually going to shoot. Like, really? Like, yeah, none. He was like, so you gave me a green light, but I have no idea what's going on. But that day, in classic Lynch fashion, gets the green light, has no ideas. It's at night. What does he do? He meditates. And then like a string of pearls, one idea came after another and another and another and all these ideas and the whole thing fit together. And I had the ending. And so, yeah, the last hour of the film. So like, in other words, like the first hour and a half is more or less what was the TV pilot. And the last hour is all the new stuff that he shot. Right. So the ending essentially. So all the stuff with Diane at reality, and the stuff at Club Silencio and the sex scene, that's all the new stuff.
The new stuff.
Yeah. Now, I mean, the sex scene is kind of obvious because they weren't going to have that on television. On ABC.
Yeah, definitely not.
Definitely not. Nor angry masturbation and all that. Yeah.
That's up for debate.
Okay. So, in other words, if you follow the common interpretation, the way you would interpret David Lynch's quote process there would be something along the lines of he had a story that was meant to kind of like be open-ended and expand out, but then he needed an ending. So he came up with, instead of like, he basically did the opposite of what he did in the Twin Peaks pilot and the international pilot. Remember we talked about that? He like comes up with a quote dream that's the ending. And in this one, he comes up with a reality that's the ending. Except in both cases, that's not true. Because in the Twin Peaks situation, what became the dream sequence wasn't a dream sequence at all in the context of the international pilot. And in this case, as I'm going to argue, that the common interpretation leaves a lot out. And it's important to understand that. So I don't think David Lynch's idea was like, oh, now I show the reality. David Lynch's idea was, I'm building from the idea, as always, I already had. And instead of like just stringing this out into other plots, I'm instead going to silo it down to its core point. So in other words, it's an opportunity for him, like what he's trying to do with Fire Walk With Me, like what he's trying to do with that international pilot, to make the idea more clear. But he doesn't do that just by telling you. He does it by showing it to you from another angle. So what he instead does is, he says, okay, the idea with Mulholland Drive was to show the dream of Hollywood, but then show that there was actually an undercurrent beneath it that was what was really going on. And as the story would unfold, you would start to get that, right? You would start to get the abstractions, hopefully. And I think we all know from the lesson of Twin Peaks, nobody was ever going to get it. And he would have been frustrated all over again. So I actually think it worked out very nicely that he turned into a movie. I think because the movie forced him to give that information in a different way. And what he ended up coming up with was like, instead of showing you that Hollywood dream, I'm going to show you the nightmare of the Hollywood reality that pairs with that dream. And in that sense, it's not like all of a sudden I'm seeing everything real. It's more like I'm seeing these abstract concepts come to life in a different way, but a way that exposes the dark reality behind that dream, or the contrast between them, or the consequences of them, in a way that's much more rapid paced than what would have been in the drawn out TV version, right? So it all works out there. Now that we explained that, let's talk about our good friend that we mentioned a lot on the Twin Peaks interview as kind of like my guru when it comes to interpreting this stuff, whether you like it or not. I'm sure it still rubs some people the wrong way, but the YouTuber Twin Perfect, he also made a movie. He also made a video explaining Mulholland Drive, much shorter video, which is good for us because I'll be able to explain a lot of what he says in pretty quick fashion.
Sure.
Much shorter video explaining his interpretation of Mulholland Drive. So again, citing my source, I've seen that video. It definitely influenced almost everything I'm going to say now. But like what we did with Twin Peaks, I think I take what he said and kind of infuse it with my own introspection about these concepts and even what's happened in the real world since then, which I think is important once you get to what this movie is really about and like all that stuff. But I'll start by just kind of breaking down the basics more or less as he explains it, and keep that in mind. But definitely, of course, check out Twin Perfect's Mulholland Drive video, see the source, all power to that man. So most of the movie in this interpretation, now forget the common interpretation. This is the interpretation we're going to go with, right? Most of the movie is Diane or Betty's story. Like I'm going to use Diane and Betty from now on a little more interchangeably for a reason. It's because they really are the same person. Betty is just an idea of Diane's about Diane, or about what Diane wishes to be.
Maybe her, who she wishes she was, maybe.
Well, it's So when you say it like that, it sounds more like
like her ideal version of herself.
But think of it less like a hypothetical and more like this is what she tells herself every day. You know what I mean? Like this is how she tells herself she is and what her life is like every day of her life. Right? Think of it like that. That's a good way to put it. So in other words,
like her own delusion. This is
her delusion. Her delusion is a way to put it. Though I think the reason I would avoid the word delusion is because her quote delusion in this case reveals a lot of truth, right? So we'll have to just we're going to break that down. But the idea is that this is the story that we're seeing for that first chunk of the movie is that as it is, or as she sees it from that perspective, which is this is her quote Hollywood dream. It's the story that because it's her Hollywood dream is symbolic and representative of quote the Hollywood dream, which is the Hollywood dream that all of us collectively tend to imagine about Hollywood. Now, when I say all of us, I'm kind of excluding me or you, right, Dana? Why? Because we live here. We work in this industry. We know people. We've seen it goes, and we're also in 2021. But think more before 2017.
Before social media really shows you. Also, there's so much behind the scenes and making of. I think a lot of people are getting more of a general sense. And now with all of these possible union strikes within the business, a lot of the ugly side of the business is being revealed to the public.
Right.
The 17-hour work days and all that type of stuff that some productions work with.
Right. No, everything
all
you
the
said,
underbellies are kind of coming to light right now in 2021.
Yeah, everything you said is absolutely spot on to that point. We do know a lot more about it now collectively, but that's why I'm have to frame this movie as a movie that came out in the year 2001 when the internet was still new and what most people thought of Hollywood. And I would also like to say there is still this idea out there. It's just a lot less people really buy into it because even like you go to middle America now, a lot of their ideas of Hollywood are not really all that aspiring. They're more like, oh, that's where all the evil liberals come from. But putting that aside, right? Back in the day, it would be like what you think of Hollywood is what you think of what the movies tell you. The Hollywood's movies about movies. That's why the Oscars are so obsessed with, the backstage drama, because they're trying to propagandize about the industry. They want people to believe this myth of Hollywood.
So you can.
It's not that they but it's product. I'm sure you see it too. It's not just even that they want other people to believe it. They want to believe it themselves, just like Diane/Betty. They want to believe that they're in this sheen veneer, like, ooh, Hollywood is so wonderful and magical and dreamy, right? It's beautiful out here. They want people to believe that. They want to believe it themselves, right? They want that delusion, if you will. So where that delusion comes out, and this is what I meant about the media and the airwaves and David Lynch's interest in that, is it comes out in movies itself. It comes out in TV shows itself. It comes out in magazines, all the celebrity magazines. Like, wow, look how amazing the life of Angelina Jolie is. Look at the amazing how there's a party in the hills. There's all these different things. All the cliches is what we're talking about, right? So all those cliches compose this context of the quote Hollywood dream. So the Diane's Hollywood dream, the Betty dream, is a dream composed of the Hollywood dream. It's meant to symbolize it. It takes from it. It is part of it, right? So it's also what the payoff is too. It's like this idea. Oh, I can go to Hollywood and I can make it. I just need bright light and good luck, and can-do attitudes will pay off. And that's how I'll get there.
And it seemed like for Diane, she got the good luck. Like she had a place to stay. And, when the taxi drops her off.
Yeah.
Like her.
Oh, yeah. The way the guy's
already got
where
the bags for her and like waiting for her. And I'm like, this is perfect.
That's one of the funniest moments I didn't highlight earlier when after she goes by the of couple, just the way it cuts to a wide shot over her shoulder. There's like a cab driver's already opened the thing, putting her bags in. It's like, he's like,
already here for you.
He's like, where to? And like the corniest tone, where to? And she's like, 1545 Havenhurst. Like, it's so ridiculous.
He just knows where it is.
To your point, in her Hollywood dream, Diane plays the part of the Hollywood idealized dream version of herself, which is Betty. So this is why David Lynch wanted her to act the way she acted. This is why he's like, no, act like a bright-eyed kid on an ice cream. That's what I'm trying to get across. I mean, in a lot of ways, she's just playing Emma Stone in La La Land. Like that's her story. La La Land is basically a totally un-Lynchian version where you don't get any of the other shit. You just like, yeah, this is how it works. You go to get your big Hollywood dream, and it's beautiful, and you're just the most talented actress in the world, and all you need is a little stroke of good luck, and then you'll have it. And as long as you keep up your can-do attitude, you will make it. Like, I don't know what that voice was. It was a little bit like Jack McBrayer, which is, I think, who I was thinking of. But I can do his voice better than that, you know? So getting back to that very beginning, what David Lynch meant by the two clues, the two clues are given to you right away, is Diane wins the jitterbug contest, like she will tell us later. And that's when her Hollywood dream begins. So that's metaphorically symbolized by that POV shot of the head crashing in the pillow. Go to sleep, as in the dream begins. The Hollywood dream, Diane's Hollywood dream, which is the dream of Betty, begins at that moment. Now,
oh yeah, the pillow in the beginning.
Yes. So thinking of why the name Betty, right? Now, I know there's that whole thing with the name tags on the waitress, but this is a red herring or a misinterpretation, as I'm going to explain. The name Betty is very simple. It's because that's the
Betty
name
Boop?
of a character in David Lynch's favorite movie of all time, Sunset Boulevard, which is a classic golden age Hollywood film. Another one of these behind the scenes, arguably puff pieces, though it has a dark ending. It's like it's a kind of like a. And that's why David Lynch probably likes it. It has balance. You've seen Sunset Boulevard.
Who's in it again?
Gloria Swanson and William Holden, Eric von Stroheim. It's a 1950 film. It's a Billy Wilder film. It's one of the most like celebrated movies of all time. I don't know if you haven't seen it. Yeah, I haven't seen it, but we'll cover it at some point, I'm sure. Maybe.
No, I don't think I have. This doesn't look familiar to me at all.
Really? I just think it's like a movie that every actor watches. Honestly, I'm shocked that you haven't seen it actually. It's such an actor's movie. Yeah, okay. Well, you have to check it out sometime.
Yeah, and I don't think I've even heard of it.
Crazy. I'm going to have to keep referencing it a lot because it's David Lynch's favorite movie of all time. And there's a ton. I'm going to reference it a lot next week in The Return because there's a whole bunch of, there's literally a scene where Cooper watches Sunset Boulevard. And there's a character in Sunset Boulevard named Gordon Cole. David Lynch borrows from this movie constantly. Anyway. all that being said, it's not my favorite. It's not really like my kind of movie actually, but it's you know, it's something everyone should see at least once. Anyway, getting
well, don't they say that good artists borrow and great artists steal?
They do say that, yes.
Isn't that the saying?
Mm-hmm. Which is why I steal. Constantly.
Which is why we need to do stealing of Lynch. He would understand. He would understand if we stole from him the way he stole from Sunset Boulevard.
I already do steal from him constantly, Dan. Have you ever seen any of my movies? Anyway, that's beside the point. All that said, yes, he names the character Betty because of Sunset Boulevard. Sunset Boulevard and David Lynch's love for him is symbolic of the fact that this, like a lot of other things, David Lynch's like picking apart of this Hollywood dream that we're talking about is not coming from a cynical place. David Lynch is incapable of being cynical. What he's doing is, or what should be acknowledged, is that David Lynch loves this Hollywood dream. To him, it's beautiful. It's like he loves Sunset Boulevard because it shows that dream, but it's also balanced. It shows that there is this other side to it too. And it's woven into what he loves about LA. Like David Lynch loves living in LA because he loves feeling like he's forever living in the movie Sunset Boulevard. And this is why in Mulholland Drive, the signs for the street Sunset Boulevard are everywhere. He's constantly showing the shots of it, right? And he's constantly shooting on the location of Sunset Boulevard. And you can even take the apartment that Betty moves into, her aunt's apartment. It's a fictional address, but it's at Havenhurst, and where it would be is like where Havenhurst and Sunset meet. So again, it's kind of like right there. It's also weirdly basically the location of where the Chateau Marmont is, notice. And when Betty walks into her aunt's apartment, like the courtyard, the way it looks a lot like the set for Sunset Boulevard, Norma Desmond's mansion, basically. So now getting back to answering the question of the name tags, right, is you have the name Betty and the name Diane on name tags in one reality and then the other, right? It's not meant to mean that Diane becomes Betty or Betty steals the name from the waitress. It's more of a representation of the waitress herself being a waitress. Whether you are in the Hollywood dream or you're in the Hollywood reality, you are still in a world where waitresses and actors are kind of interchangeable people, right? That's kind of the sort of conceptual, abstract way of understanding that, which is the correct way, I would argue. Now, when we go to Betty's audition, what is that audition? It's a perfect fantasy of what someone who doesn't know what auditions are really like might imagine them to be, right? Because it's like everyone is in the room, everyone is eager.
Yeah, that's fair.
A scene partner. She's given the full attention of everybody.
Everyone's paying attention.
Right, which, as you know, Dana, that's not what it's like at all. And look, I'll give La La Land credit, like at least
where they don't even look up.
Yeah. Right. No one looks up at you. No one talks to you. There's like,
it's just like, oh, they're not even gonna, they're just texting.
Right.
They're just like texting sometimes. I don't want to knock on casting directors because not all the offices are like this.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It's like some crazy office. The other thing to keep in mind about the audition is that the director in this audition is Bob Booker, right? It's a name that comes up and is important, right? So Bob in reality is revealed later at that dinner table scene at Kesher's place in the reality of Hollywood is revealed to be the director of the Sylvia North story, not Adam Kesher, but him. And the big film that Betty is brought into the screen test soundstage for in the dream, that's the Sylvia North story. That's why you think in the dream of Hollywood, the director was Adam Kesher. But in reality, Diane didn't get the part of and the director, quote, as she says, didn't like her. But in the Hollywood dream, when we see Booker in that audition sequence, he's shown to be this very clueless kind of hack who just everyone kind of rolls their eyes at everything he says. And the project he's on is a much smaller film, which is why even after Betty aced the audition and everyone agrees she did, and Booker's still doing this, all of a sudden the casting is just like, whatever, that project's not even going to happen. Don't worry about it. We're bringing you to a much bigger film. So it's just like this whole sort of sequence of like reasons why, in Diane's mind, her failure to get the Sylvia No story was not her fault. It was just, the circumstance in this. And actually it was a much better film that I was going to be auditioning for and all this stuff, right? Likewise, this idea of the Hollywood dream is also the reflection that you get of it in Adam Kesher's story, because whether you're Betty or Adam Kesher, if things don't go your way, it must be because the Hollywood mafia conspiracy is working against you. It's never your fault. So Kesher can't be a sellout. He's forced by the mob to sacrifice his artistic vision. They demand he change the actress, blah, 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 that he's not allowed to pick anymore. This is the girl. This is the girl. These people at the top of the Hollywood, whether the Consigliano brothers or the other guys or Mr. Rook, they're all just these eccentric weirdos who can't be predicted and they're hard to please, which is why I get the espresso scene. It's like, they're impenetrable. They're just these crazy people that do things seemingly at random. And that's why it's never your fault. Like, I don't know what's going to happen. And even above that conspiracy, right, is this force of luck or even fate, right? And that's what the cowboy is. So the cowboy is an abstraction in human form that represents Hollywood itself, or the concept of Hollywood fate. And that's why it lives at the top of Beechwood Canyon, because just like the Hollywood sign, which is up there around the same area, it can also be reached by climbing up Mulholland Drive, which is, again, gets us the idea of the opening limo ride. Now, the opening limo ride, which, as I pointed out, is repeated in the end with Diane, right, is the most important thing in terms of the metaphor and the rest of it, which is why David Lynch started with it in the pilot. It's interesting, though, when it's repeated, as Diane said to Camilla, but in both cases, it's the metaphor of that climb upwards towards Hollywood stardom, right? You start and you move up Mulholland Drive towards the Hollywood sign, or towards the cowboy, towards the final destination, the top of Hollywood. And what happens both times? Car stops and woman, whether it's Camilla or Diane, says, we don't stop here. As in, we haven't reached the top yet. We're trying to get to the top. And so you're stopping before I reach the top. We don't stop here. In the beginning, it's Camilla after she says that. And right after what happens, she's forced out because the driver's revealed to be mafia guys with guns. And then all of a sudden an accident happens, right? In the reality, it's Diane, and it's after the car stops, she says, "We don't stop here." The door opens up to reveal Camila, and she's like, "Here, take the shortcut, take the secret path up." So what does this mean? What it means is it's compliance with the sexual harassment, the abuse, and the coercion of men in power in Hollywood, or more crassly, it's the metaphor for sleeping your way to the top. That's the shortcut. That's the secret path to the top of the Hollywood, is to sleep your way up there, not by acting, a talent, or fate, or any of these other forces that were shown throughout the Hollywood dream. It's by sleeping your way to the top. It's by giving in compliance to the sexual harassment, the abuse, and the coercion of actresses by the men in power who control Hollywood, right? That's the idea here. So what is then Camila herself in relationship to this? Well, Camila, despite appearances, is not a person. She is not the ex-lover of Diane, right? And this is really important to understanding if you want to understand how we should really view the character of Diane and relate to her story. Camila is not a person. Camila is herself another abstraction in human form. She isn't an actress who slept her way to the top, right? She is the very idea of sleeping your way to the top. So when in reality, at the party, when Diane recalls that she, quote, met Camila on the Sylvia North story, and it was Camila that got the part, not her, it's because when she auditioned for the Sylvia North story was when she first learned of the way it works, that Camila is how you get the part, right? So the actress who got the part in reality is the one who's called Camila in the Hollywood dream. It's this is the girl played by Melissa George. Remember how I described Melissa George's reaction and performance when she comes on the stage? She looks all like nervous and uneasy, right? That's because she's been victimized by the director, but she, nevertheless gets the part. And this is why Camila kisses her and why it infuriates Diane. It's not like petty lovers quarrel jealousy. It's the disgust and humiliation and sense of shame that comes from the fact that she's looking at what it takes to actually get the part. That reminder of the only way you get ahead here from what she's seen and experienced is to sleep with the director, to let yourself be victim to that abuse and coercion. You'll notice, to make the point even more clear on that, right after the kiss between Camila and Melissa George's character, you see the cowboy walking by. Remember what I said? That's the third time the cowboy walks by if you do bad, right? The third time, it's symbolizing that the kiss is what granted her the success, the good fortune, the good fate. So it's like that kind of thing where it's like a reversal what the cowboy said. It's like, see me 3 times, you do bad. Well, you did it bad, but you're going to get what the cowboy is willing to give you. You get that Hollywood success, Hollywood fate, Hollywood luck shines upon those who use Camila, who play the game. So why does the crash happen to Camila in the Hollywood dream? That first time we see it, why does it happen that way? It's because in the dream, sleeping away to the top is a disaster that leaves you broken and confused, hence the amnesia. But as in reality, it's still a way into Hollywood, or onto Sunset Boulevard, which is where Camila goes. After the crash, she goes to Sunset Boulevard. So she still gets into Hollywood by being herself, by being Camila. But she's also at the same time an amnesiac who's confused because there's no real room for that identity within the context of the Hollywood dream, right? Or there's not supposed to be, I should say. Camila, like I said, not only doesn't know who she is, but she, to the people who meet her, including Betty, is no one. She has no name, no identity. And that's because the problem of Hollywood sexual abuse and its role in the power hierarchy is a secret, an open secret within Hollywood, but to the outside of Hollywood, it's unknown to most. Or it certainly was before 2017, right? Before the Me Too movement came out. That's the whole context for this film that we have to keep in mind. This is pre-Me Too. This is, in a weird way, David Lynch trying to sound those alarm bells before that. Now, I don't want to give him any credit for that because he, in his Lynchian way, shrouds in cryptic messages and clues that you have to uncode and are indecipherable to most. So, it's not actually going to get people to wake up and realize it. I don't think that was necessarily his goal, but it's nevertheless something he wanted to express in his art. Betty finds Camila, and because she's naive in this Hollywood dream of hers as Betty, Diane, her way of seeing things is such that when she sees Camila there, the amnesiac in her aunt's apartment, she doesn't see her as a problem. She assumes she's a friend of her aunt. And what is her aunt? Her aunt is this representation, you could say, of the golden age of Hollywood, the Hollywood of the past, this Hollywood that, from the perspective of Betty, is the glitz and glamour she aspires to, right? That old school Hollywood, Sunset Boulevard. And it's notable that when she assumes that Camila is a friend of her aunt's, that's the point at which Camila takes on her new name for the rest of the dream, which is Rita. And she gets the name, as we see, from the poster of Rita Hayworth. So Rita is, in a sense, Rita Hayworth. Now, who is Rita Hayworth? Well, she's the star of the film Gilda, where she plays a femme fatale, big brunette femme fatale. She has blonde hair in some other movies. But the idea is that she's a golden age star who notably was married to several important Hollywood producers, directors, including Orson Welles. And you could say from that perspective that in some ways, this is the golden age sheen that's put over to cover up the Camila, the abuse, the power dynamics, the coercion that were always there. And it's because of it, but because it's just a golden age, well-known icon like Rita Hayworth, instead of a modern but kept secret Camila, Betty accepts her as a friend, nothing to fear, just another path open to her at any point, right? So it's like, well, I'd rather be known as a great actress than a famous star, but like what she doesn't say in that part is, but of course I could, be more like you, Rita, and then maybe, I don't know, maybe Ben would take a shine at me and we'll get married and they'll cast me, but that's fine. It's not a bad thing. I have power. It's a good look. It's just tabloid gossip. Like that's kind of the veneer of the Rita to it. This also brings us to the idea of what else is in this Hollywood dream. Well, in the Hollywood dream of Betty, Coco, who, as we pointed out, is played by Hollywood actress of the golden age, Ann Miller. And what does Coco try to do? She tries to warn her about Rita and to get rid of the trouble. The same thing with the other famous actress, Lee Grant, who plays the woman in the shroud. It's like, oh, there's trouble in there. There's someone in trouble. She tries to get them to acknowledge that Camila, aka Rita, is in that room into Hollywood. In that room itself kind of represents Hollywood, right? Because it's the aunt's apartment, and it's there, and they want it out, right? But as we learn, when we then switch to the reality of Hollywood, we are shown that Coco is actually friends with Camila and is the mother to Adam Kesher. Adam Kesher, who, as I'll explain, represents the men at the top of Hollywood who use their power games to abuse and control, right? So she's a friend of theirs. She's the mother of them. So in other words, the golden age is not separate from this. It is part of it, is woven into the very fabric of it. The point with Coco being involved with Adam, or being his mother, being relation, knowing Camila, having this approving sort of demeanor towards Camila, is to represent the point that the golden age is not innocent. All the things we're talking about were going on then too, just maybe even a little less visible and having a little bit more of this veneer or post hoc veneer of nostalgia. You'll recognize this most acutely when you see Coco stroking and patting Diane's hand with a kind of knowing pity when she speaks about how Camila was, quote, able to help get her some smaller parts. Like she didn't help her get Sylvia North's story. That was Melissa George, but she was able to help Camila get some other parts. So in other words, take that understanding. Yes, Diane has allowed or been complicit, or it's hard to say because we're obviously talking about things that, because the power dynamics are not should not be seen as consensual, but has been mixed up in, maybe is the best way to put it, has been mixed up in situations where she was taken advantage of, and that did lead to favor being granted on her, even as it damaged her mentally and spiritually, right? And Coco says, as she strokes patting her hand with that pity, she goes, I see. Like, oh, I get what you mean, darling. I know what Camila is. And yeah, like I said, Adam represents men in power. It represents the directors, the producers, whomever, that reality reveals as not being forced by conspiracy to cast as Camila, but in reality, he's marrying Camila. He is all about Camila. All those directors, producers, people in Hollywood, they love Camila. They're like, Camila's here to stay. We're going to be here forever and ever with Camila. Now, obviously, that's ideas that this is a now and forever relationship between men and Hollywood and the sexual exploitation of female talent. But, you know, I don't want to just say female. Male talent, obviously, is also exploited by men or just people in power, because there are women in power in some cases that will exploit a man and sexually abuse a man. It happens. You know, I can think of a couple of famous cases of that even. But yeah, that type of thing. The power dynamic is not gender exclusive. It's not sexuality exclusive. We're in the context of Mulholland Drive and the symbols here, it's men and women, but it can be men on men, women on women, people who don't identify with a certain gender, or people who have another type of sexuality, hetero, homo, anything, bi. It all works. No matter what, there's people in power, and then there's people who are not in power, and then there's their exploitation by those in power. So this brings us to another thing that David Lynch points out as clues, which is the red lampshade. We see it twice, right? Both times it's before Diane makes her way, Diane, quote, makes her way into Hollywood. In the Hollywood dream, we see it, and then it cuts to Betty's arrival at the airport. It's all bright and sunny and all that stuff. In reality, it cuts from the red lampshade to where Betty's on the phone being told by Camila that she's going to be taken up to this address at the top of Mulholland Drive, to that moment we see, of course, where the cars stop. We don't stop here. Camila comes out and she's like, here's the shortcut. So the idea, of course, is red lamp, red light, sex work, right? So in the context of the dream, it's like, oh, sex work, forget that. It's bright and sunny. Don't worry about it. In reality, it's like, nope, you're going to see it and you're going to feel it. You're going to be put in a position where it seems like you're not living your dream at all. You're just a sex worker, which, again, absolutely no shade. Not trying to make a pun there either. No shade thrown to sex workers. I think sex work is a wonderful profession when done in ethical and consensual ways, of course. Now, the audition scene, right? Let's run this to the lens. You have the actual dialogue in the scenario. Think about that. The whole thing was like, oh, this sort of father's friend and the shame and all this stuff. This is a crash course metaphor in the internalized abuse an actor goes through as they go through Hollywood. They want to speak out about the abuse, but they fear being judged or ruined. They fear being blacklisted. It's like, that's why I just like, oh, you'll never tell. It's like, oh, I'll call the cops. It's like, no, you won't. It's like, I hate us. I hate us both. And so the power of seeing Naomi Watts and Betty's performance in that scene has this other context where she's really pulling her soul out about what it's really like to be this person, to be in that shame and that guilt and that fear, and the way it ruins you, the way it tears your soul. This brings us now to the whole idea of Club Silencio, the no hay banda. You're coming to this end of the recording, the movie. This is a movie, the place where movies are made, movies come from. And what is it? It is a land of silence. And because of that silence, all we can do, but within the veil of the silence, we can cry, crying. Becca Del Rio sings crying, brings the woman to tears. Even Camila cries for herself because Camila is wearing the wig of Betty. She is Betty. She's Betty using Camila. She cries for the pain and the suffering and the shame and the guilt and the confusion. And in the end, she just dies. But the recording goes on. The movies go on. The movies keep being made with the silence, the protection of the veil of silence, Silencio. It's this idea that everyone just, because remember, this movie came out before Me Too, before the Weinstein revelations, before any of that. Kind of everyone knows this goes on. Like once you get to Hollywood, the Hollywood dream shatters for you pretty quick because you realize, oh, what it's really like. Behind that curtain, behind that door, how decisions are actually made. It's who's sleeping with who, and who can be my pawn in this fucked up power dynamic that I just wield. There's even the part where Adam Kesher is showing the young actor on his set how to take advantage of a woman. He's like, oh, don't worry about her crying. Just pull her in. Like, this is the way it works out here.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So that's what Diane is confronting, where it's just like, yeah, you either play ball with me, sweetheart, or you don't get anywhere. You know, honestly, like, keeping that in mind, I don't know, and to your experience, how does that make you feel when you see the movie in that light? Because really what we're talking about with the suicide of Diane at the end is not necessarily a literal suicide, though you, I guess, can read it that way. It's more of the death of her soul.
You could also read it as the death of her dreams.
The death of her dream. Right. No, I mean it both her soul and her
like
dream.
Who she is. And
humiliation at recognizing that this is the only way she'll ever get anywhere. And it's something she can't live with. I have a lot of empathy is what I'm getting at for Diane. I think the common interpretation leaves you with a sort of not a lot of reason to empathize with Diane. It's like, oh, she's just some jealous, jilted lover who kills her lover and then feels guilty. That's not what actually happens if you follow this interpretation. What it actually is she is a broken person who's like, and this is, I mean, again, I don't want to spoil Last Night in Soho, but what if I told you it's basically the same story? It's a broken person who like just has been beaten down so much that like there's just nothing left for her. That's what it actually is. Camila is not some person. Like, so there is no other person that she's in a relationship with. It's just the acknowledgement of this existence that like it's right there for her, and she's dabbled in it, but it's like too much it's not good enough because there'll always be some other Melissa George who maybe gets the director's attention a little easier. And so even if she wants to sleep her way up to the top, it really doesn't solve her problems. And, you know, I'm sure Naomi as an actress related to that too, you know. Now, the legacy of Mulholland Drive, I should point out, you know, this road to 2017 to the Twin Peaks return. David Lynch, as we mentioned, has big success with Mulholland Drive, gets Oscar nominations, doesn't win, but, you know. And after that, he starts his road into the digital kind of experimentation and the websites and this multimedia stuff that eventually leads to the film Inland Empire. We're going to save that for next year's Lynchtober, so we'll talk a lot more about that then and how that movie came about and all that. Obviously, it marked a reunion with him and Laura Dern, who hadn't worked together since Wild at Heart. And after that, David Lynch stopped making movies after Inland Empire. And so for a long time, he was quiet, doing his art, doing his music, doing his other things. And we'll tell the story next week, I'm sure. But out of nowhere, one day, that Gum You Like is coming back in style. And after that, we get the return, Twin Peaks 2017, the final journey, the magnum opus. Everything we've been building to Lynchtober builds to that moment. But okay, Dana, I think that'll have to do it here. That's Mulholland Drive. It's a dark story, which I think is why it ends with that remembrance of the bright lights of what Betty's dream was, because that dream might still exist in theory, but it's not really, it's ruined. It gets killed every time. You come out here, it gets killed. Don't let it get killed for you, though, Dana. Right. Don't let it get killed for you. I want you to have optimism about yourself. You know. But
I'm in a different time. It's 2021 and we make things happen for ourselves now, you know?
I hope. Well,
I
think we all know
cameras and equipment is more readily accessible. We can make it happen for ourselves. No, problems are not solved. Absolutely not. However, we're having a little more choice, a little more freedom, and definitely a lot more accessibility to making and producing and getting our own work out there.
Yeah, look,
I saw your movie in Hollywood.
Exactly. And I'll say this, and I think you'll agree with it. And this is the note I would want to end on is if you have to deal with these things, or remember, you can speak out, find people that will listen, speak out. I promise you, you know, I can't say I've lived through it exactly in this way, but I think other survivors will attest to it. And I have my own experiences that may have provide some analogy. Like if you speak out, you will give yourself an opportunity to don't fear. Cause that's the thing. Diane, of course, like any other actor, She doesn't speak out because she fears the backlash. She fears being blacklisted. She fears being kicked down even lower than she already is. Right. So that's the danger. But okay,
right, and
Dana.
that's a very real fear. But it is a new time, a new day. So don't be afraid to speak up if anyone makes you feel uncomfortable or trying to make you feel like you have to do certain things to get considered for roles. Mm-hmm. That's not your project. Find a new project. Well,
there you have it. The penultimate Lynchtober. Next week we are concluding with the return of Twin Peaks. So stay forward to that, and also stay forward to more Cinphomaniac rapid fires.
Let's hit the fucking road. We're giving our neighbor a joyride. Let's get on with it. Anyone want to go on a joyride with us? How about you? Huh? Let's fuck! Hi!